This is Winnipeg Sports Talk Daily with Andrew Hustler Paterson and Michael Remis.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to Winnipeg Sports Talk Daily. Regular season in the rearview mirror, and wow, quite a cannonball into the deep end of the offseason coming out of yesterday's win over the Seattle Kraken in game number 82, and post-game comments from a number of players, most in particular one Mark Scheifele. We're going to get to all of this coming up. Of course, big news on Kevin Cheveldayoff, the coaching staff. We'll talk about all of that today on the program. And we will hear from Mark Scheifele, Blake Wheeler, Paul Stastny, Adam Lowry, maybe a little bit of Coach Dave Lowry, who, of course, likelihood will not be the head coach next year after the announcements today from Frank Saravelli, Ken Weeb, and whatnot. But Kevin Cheveldayoff is, of course, apparently holding a 3-year extension going forward and will be the guy making these decisions for the Winnipeg Jets going forward. So we have an absolutely packed show today. We're only going to have one guest, and we'll wait till the second hour of the program so we can get through all of this if you've missed anything over the past 24 hours or so coming out of the season. Couple things. First off, Dennis Bayak, congratulations. You're the best. What a great way it was to finish up. You got to go bang, 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 bang in the third period as the Jets came back, winning that 82nd game of the regular season. An amazing, warm welcome and farewell from Winnipeg Jets fans to Dennis, and a pretty cool scene beforehand as Dennis got to go in and read out the starting lineups to the Winnipeg Jets in his final game as the voice of the Winnipeg Jets on TSN for 11 years. So congratulations to Dennis again. I know we spoke about it quite extensively last week when the announcement was made, but definitely a nice way to end the season and end Dennis's incredible tenure here being the voice of Winnipeg Jets hockey to fans in Winnipeg and around the world. Also do want to give a big thank you to the incredible people over at the D Las Vegas and Circa for the amazing hospitality last week. Great to see some Winnipeggers that dropped by as well. That was a nice surprise. But it is great to be back. A little jet lag, still on West Coast time. But holy smokes, we've got a lot to get to right out of the gate. And speaking about the gate, before I bring Michael Remis in, a big thanks to the sponsors that make Winnipeg Sports Talk happen. Great to have Assiniboia Downs back on board with us. We'll get ready for the Kentucky Derby on the weekend with our pal Kirk Contois later on this week. Live racing starting at the end of the month. We'll fill you in on the exciting upcoming season for Assiniboia Downs all summer long here on Winnipeg Sports Talk, as well as Aikens Lake Wilderness Lodge, Wallace & Wallace, F Apparel, Vita Health, Fresh Market, Culligan Water, Manitoba Battery, Royal Sports, Breezy Bend Country Club, Not Autocorp, Little Brown Jug, Princess Auto, Boston Pizza, Nick and Nicky DQ Group, Canadian Club Whiskey, and of course our betting partners over at Coolbet Canada. Oh yeah, speaking of Coolbet, the playoffs start tonight. We will touch on that later on. We'll have plenty of time to talk playoffs as we get in. Today's show will be dominated by the season that was, what we learned at the end of yesterday's game from a number of players, particularly Mark Scheifele, and of course, how this organization moves forward, coaching-wise, as well as player movement, in what will certainly be the most intriguing offseason we've seen in 11 years since the Jets came here from Atlanta. Let's get Michael Remis in here and start things off. Remo, great to be back. How are you? Great job holding down the fort last week. And I know you sort of took my spot being a regular at the games over the weekend. Hey, you know what? Nice win over Calgary. Fun way to finish the season with the 3-goal comeback in the third period. But I have a feeling we're not going to be spending too much time talking about the games on the weekend, considering everything that's happening around this club.
Yeah, I had a great time. Friday night, I went as a fan. And I thought it was a great atmosphere on Friday, considering the game was the standings have already been decided. There was some intensity, Calgary getting into it with the Jets, a lot of post-whistle stuff. Matthew Tkachuk. This hasn't really been touched on, but Morrissey sticked Matthew Tkachuk in the face early on. And the third period, Matthew Tkachuk, I think unintentionally, but intentionally got Morrissey back. I found that interesting. A guy who knows how to make it look like an accident, but the Jets won. Dan Vladar was excellent.
By the way, it shouldn't have mattered. It was an accident. I don't know how he didn't get a penalty on that.
They showed it on the screen. It was crazy, but I think, no player one-hands that. He was clear what he was trying to do, and if there's any doubt about the injury on Mark Scheifele a couple years ago in the playoffs, whether it was intentionally, that's a guy who knows how to make an infraction against a player look like an accident when he knows what he's doing. Having said that, he did help me win my fantasy league on Friday with that goal. So,
congratulations!
I'm a big Tkachuk guy now. Yesterday's game, we'll get into it. The second period was awful. They came back and then went bang, bang, bang in the third period. And it was a great atmosphere. The standing ovation for Dennis was well-deserved and excellent. It was, it was a nice send-off, for the season that was extremely disappointing. And here we are. We're done talking about the games that were played. The last 24 hours, I was going to say, over the last 24 hours, if you like reality TV and storylines and drama, there has been no better reality show than the Winnipeg Jets. The last 24 hours for sure, but even over the last couple of years, but most notably, what do we have? Scheifele's comments that everyone's talking about, leading off 32 thoughts. The coaching staff, GM extension. There is a lot to get to here.
Okay, well, let's get to it right away because I think the Mark Scheifele conversation, and hey, regulars, and shout out to everyone that's with us. I know we got a big bump in people right here at the beginning of the show. Thanks for being with us. We're here each and every day, 1:00 Central on YouTube. If you haven't joined us before, hit that red subscribe button. There's going to be no shortage of content and topics to get to for this Winnipeg Jets off season. And of course, welcome to everyone that's listening on the podcast a little bit later on today. Anyone that's been regular around this program knows that, and I tweeted this out as much yesterday. I was not surprised at all to hear what Mark Scheifele said. It seemed like something had gone wrong in particular with that player and this team a long time ago. I think it had a really negative effect on this hockey club. And my opinion, we'll hear from it, sounded like a guy, and I know Kevin Cheveldayoff didn't want to say that he had asked for a trade, but that sounded like, how do you ask for a trade without asking for a trade? Well, we'll hear in a minute from Mark Scheifele. But outside of that, there has been some big news. Mark, first of all, Ken Wiebe announcing that Kevin Cheveldayoff's back on a 3-year extension. And Remo, I texted this to you yesterday. Just knowing how the Jets work, and this goes back to Paul Maurice in the past. I'd said that I didn't expect Chevy to be out. I think it was pretty clear, with what had happened over the course of this season, back in the aftermath of the Blackhawks scandal, that, I think that David Poyle's tenure in Nashville is sort of what the Winnipeg Jets have built their organization on, and that is stability at the general manager position. And some people will like it, some people will hate it, but I'm not surprised at all that Kevin Cheveldayoff is the guy moving forward. But Ken Wiebe, shout out to Weber, did report yesterday in his Sportsnet.ca article that Kevin Cheveldayoff has a 3-year extension. To be honest, I would imagine that this has probably been done for a while. It's been sitting in a drawer, a signed contract, and obviously at the end of the season, with what we're going to get to involving the coaching staff and the players, there were many questions as to who was going to be calling the shots and running this ship. That's not changing right now, and if anything, the announcement or the leak of that to Ken that Cheveldayoff has the extension, because there hasn't been any formal announcement.
Chevy did acknowledge it off the top. I know that you were doing lock shop.
Yeah. Well, no, I knew that he did, but just the fact that came out yesterday and the way that it did, it was more like, hey, if you're wondering about it, and to be honest, if you were going to make a change at general manager, now would maybe be the worst time to possibly do that. There is so much going on right now for the Winnipeg Jets to get ahead of these things. Frankly, I think they're already behind a few of these things, as we'll talk about. But starting a general manager search at this point with everything going around the hockey club would be in my opinion, would be maybe the worst possible time to do it. So I'm not surprised, but what this does is, at least for the media and many people asking the question, hey, you don't need to ask it anymore. Kevin Cheveldayoff's running the show going forward. However, today, Remis, we did learn, I believe, and if I'm wrong, I know the insiders and everyone that breaks these stories always likes proper credit. I think it was Frank Saravelli that made the first announcement. It was confirmed later on by Kevin Cheveldayoff that the Winnipeg Jets are going to be conducting a full search for a head coach. Dave Lowry, as Kevin Cheveldayoff mentioned, has earned the right, I guess, to technically apply for it, but it certainly sounds like, with the exception of Wade Flaherty, who obviously has got a great relationship with Connor Hellebuck and Eric Comrie, that the head coach, and coaching staff will all be applying for jobs in the offseason. I think it's reasonable to assume that the entire head coaching staff is going to look different, which is significant, because even when Paul Maurice came in and then Dave Lowry took over from Paul Maurice's long tenure, Charlie Huddy's been here since day one. Jamie Compound's been here for a long time. There certainly was an appetite from people on this program to see a significant shakeup within the organization. If it's not happening with the general manager, it absolutely would be happening with the coaching staff. And we got some clarity today to that a full search is on. And in all likelihood, barring Dave Lowry being able to go into a meeting and convince Kevin Cheveldayoff and Mark Chipman that he is the guy that can make the difference and turn this thing around, which, I mean, considering the season that we've just seen, I think is highly unlikely. There will be a new bench boss and a new coaching staff, which I think is something that people also wanted to hear. It's hard to look at what happened this season and make the case that, anything to do with the way that this team has been run on the bench is something that should continue going forward. And it's also a very important but big opportunity for the Winnipeg Jets to bring in a new boss behind the bench, a new culture carrier, if you will, and get this thing turned around after a miserable and disappointing season, as we've heard from players over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, and so I'll start with the Cheveldayoff extension. I have to admit, I was a bit surprised to see that he was given 3 years. I think he's been here for 10, 11 years now, and the team's been in a bit of a free fall since 2019. So with that, it's odd in sports to see that kind of longevity without a championship, and he was asked that today. However, I think we all agreed, and when the Jets need tinkering, he's been able to do that, whether it's at trade deadlines. And we had called the Jets the offseason champions and simply weren't able to execute the game plan, which is, if they were going to bring Cheveldayoff back, on the flip side, it does make sense to come back with a brand new coaching staff. Now, Cheveldayoff said today that, he didn't admit that he was firing them, but he basically said they're going to have to interview for their job, but they're going to go for a new direction. The penalty kill has been consistently in the bottom third of the league. They consistently, the last couple of years, have been giving up, more slot shots than any other team. So they're going to need to look at some of their strategies, why that is, and fix that. And, the power play, is very hot and cold and sometimes looks pretty stagnant, almost deflating to the team. So, we saw that today, Frank, with the announcement but the big bombshell was Mark Scheifele yesterday. His comments, I don't want to say breaking the internet, but they were trending. He was trending on Twitter, and it was on, Tim and friends are tweeting out the video, TSN posting the video. When you talk about off-season trade targets, I don't know if Frank Saravelli has his list out, but you have to think he's certainly up there. And we have the clips ready, Huss. But to hear a player with 2 years left on his deal to say he has to talk with his family and his agent about what's best for him. Do you ever hear that? Like, what does he need to talk about? Here, we can go to the clips. You want to
listen?
Intro?
Yeah, we're going to get to that. And the one thing I'll say is that and I guess I mentioned this before. Regular listeners and people that have been with us for a long time here know that we've been talking about this possibility since I originally brought it up in November. And in November, it was that, I don't think Mark Scheifele for a long time was the franchise. He was the franchise player. In a lot of ways, everything had been built around Mark Scheifele. Everything had been done to allow him to succeed. He was, a guy with a letter on his chest. He was the number one center. He was the guy that took the majority of the ice time. And to be honest, I mean, I think he was protected by the organization. I think he was coddled to some extent. And I'll say this. I mean, I heard some people saying that, he'd been shit on by the media. I think Mark Scheifele's been has been treated with kid gloves for a long, long time in this city. And it wasn't until some of the things that have been happening with this team were so bloody obvious to anyone that pays attention to the club that you started hearing these rumblings that we'd been talking about on this show for the better part of the last 6 months. So I wasn't surprised yesterday. I think something had gone rotten with this club, and in particular with Scheifele a long time ago. But it was incredible to hear how different the comments were from a guy that's supposed to be the leader and a guy that was, in a lot of ways, anointed the franchise player to so many other players from the Winnipeg Jets yesterday. So we will start off with Scheifele. Hey, before we do that, I do want to give a big thanks to our friends at Wallace & Wallace, Winnipeg's fencing and overhead door specialists. They've been serving residential and commercial customers since 1946. If you need the security and protection of a new fence, or if winter's done a number on your old one, give them a call. They do have them all vinyl, ornamental, welded wire, chain link, or wood. And if it's time to replace your garage door, they've also got Winnipeg's largest selection of overhead garage doors. Give them a call at 452-2700. Ben, Charles, Mark, great guys there. The experts at Wallace will arrange a time to come and give you a free estimate. And you can also visit them at wallacefences.com or pop down to their showroom on Lawson Road off Kenaston. Hey, I'm really looking forward to being co-hosting the Rady dinner coming up next month with our old pal Matt Leibel. We'll talk more about that in the coming months, but that is a perfect example of a time where you need to suit it up a little bit. And if you're looking for a suit for whether at events like that, weddings, graduations, and more, F Apparel is the leader in custom suits for men. A great locally owned business downtown at 190 Smith Street with a full line of custom clothing for any occasion. But most importantly, those beautiful suits that you need at least one that fits and looks great. And of course, F's custom-made suits start at just $400. They are the top choice in Winnipeg for wedding and grad suits. Wedding parties get 15% off when the group buys their suits from F. And they've got all the latest styles and summer fabrics in right now, over 250 to choose from. So you can find out more online at F, that's EPHapparel.com, or go down and see Andrew and the gang at 190 Smith Street. And you know what? Our friends at Vita Health had that big event on Friday. It was Customer Appreciation Day. And now they are into May. And Vita Health always has great prices on Winnipeg's best selection of natural and organic supplements, beauty products, and groceries. And don't forget about Mom this weekend. Shop one of our 7 locations to find Mom the perfect Mother's Day gift. And if you can't make it into the store, visit their brand new fully shoppable website to buy online or schedule a delivery with Instacart. And if you're popping in, check out their amazing, delicious lunch options like healthy Vitamarket soups, salads, sandwiches, and more. That falafel salad is especially tasty. 7 Winnipeg locations, including the newest store in Linden Ridge, and online at myvita.ca. All right, let's start it off with Mark Scheifele. And as always, welcome to all comments in the chat. Give Scheif a marble. We're not doing a marble race today, Jay, but if we were, maybe on Friday, one final farewell marble race. If you took what we heard yesterday, the way I did, and that was in all likelihood the end of the road for one Mark Scheifele. First off, Rima, let's go to 11 first, because I think there was some question about, what was going on. Mark Scheifele did come back and skate a couple times at the end of the season. But as I mentioned on the day after the Ottawa game, the first thing that I said to the guys I was watching when Mark Scheifele went off is I wonder, or if that is the final time we see Mark Scheifele skating as a Winnipeg Jet. And Scheifele was asked about, how close he was to returning at the end of the season.
Yeah, I would have been back for playoffs for sure. I feel pretty good. I'm almost pretty close to 100%. I didn't really do any contact, so I can't really give you an answer. But I feel good. I was happy to get on the ice a couple times before the end of the year and skate with the guys. So that was a little bit of my motivation. And yeah.
In that sense, then, does it sting even more that the season's over now because you're gearing up for a potential return, but nothing to return for, right?
Yeah. Yeah, obviously that, my focus was just to get healthy. I tried not to think about all the other stuff. My focus was just to, get the right treatment, go see my team and get healthy as quick as possible and make sure I'm doing the right things and make sure it's healing properly. And I did that.
All right, so there was Mark Scheifele, and I guess in the context of everything else that we're going to hear, I mean, it almost was. It was a note to everybody else that, hey, the injury wasn't a big deal. This is going to be a guy that will be healthy next year wherever he was playing. So he spoke about how close he was to returning, and then was asked about the third straight season with the disappointing ending. Of course, in the bubble, it was the injury to Matthew Tkachuk. Last season, in the second round of the playoffs, the infamous hit that changed the series against the Montreal Canadiens against Jake Evans. And this year, it was sitting out the final 8 games of the season as his team played out the stretch, not going to the playoffs. Here's Scheifele on ending the season the way he did again.
That's hockey, you got to deal with some of that stuff, and that adversity, those tough times, have to make you stronger. If you get negative about it, if you dwell on it too long, it's only going to weigh you down. So you have to reflect. You have to think about the good things, the bad things, the things you want to fix, and go into the summer and try to come back a better person, a better player next year. And that kind of has to be the focus.
All right, so there's a little bit more from Mark Scheifele now. This is where it gets interesting. And we've talked a lot about accountability. We've certainly heard that from a number of players so far this year. Maybe it was a little different considering Scheifele had missed the last 2-3 weeks of the season. But an incredibly different tone to the Mark Scheifele comments as opposed to most of his teammates with the Winnipeg Jets. Number 14, Reem, let's go with this one. Scheifele was asked if he could describe where things started to go wrong.
I think it's hard to really pinpoint one specific time. It was just kind of, little bad spurts that end up being, monumental things to overcome. And it's one of those, years that you kind of look back on, and some of it's a blur, some of it's really clear, and it's definitely a year I'll try to forget a little bit. It was a tough one, and from a lot of things, COVID, injuries, a coach leaving, a new coach coming in, all the, all that stuff. Losing, Olympics. I forgot about that already. So, it was a tough year. COVID, all that stuff. It's one of those years that, it sucked, and it's a crappy ending. But like I said before, you can't dwell on it too long. You gotta reflect and think about the good and the bad and the ugly, and come back better next year.
All right, so there's Mark Scheifele and where things went wrong. Didn't really, said there was a lot of things, one of the things that all the other teams in the league dealt with, were sort of mentioned, but nothing really pinpointed. But the Olympics comment was interesting, and I mean, part of the reason why. Listen, I was on a Scheifele over prop for the year, and he did end up scoring at over a point a game pace. Credit where credit is due, 70 points in 67 games. Did miss 15, but and he mentioned he didn't like his first half of the season and thought that he was playing better later on in the year. I think the reason why many of us, myself included, thought that he was primed to have his best season ever was that competition to, be a member of Canada's Olympic team. And to be honest, that was why the first part of the season was so disappointing. I mean, anyone that was watching Mark Scheifele, and I know he had COVID early on, he said that he wasn't really himself till about Christmas. And again, this is the first time we've heard that. So, maybe he was dealing with more than he let on or we knew of. The bottom line was he was playing himself off that team as opposed to strengthening his case to be a member of Canada's Olympic team. And Scheifele was asked, this is 15, Remis, if he felt pressure from the Olympics going into the Christmas break.
I wouldn't say so. I probably did. I probably didn't feel really like myself probably until, after Christmas, I would say. Maybe even a little after. COVID, some bumps and some bruises and stuff like that. And, I didn't like my game early on in the year. I felt like I started to find it in the last couple of months, kind of since the All-Star break. So, I was obviously happy with that and something that I can, figure out what wasn't going at the beginning and what was going towards the end, and it's something that I can learn from, I can get better from, and that's kind of how I'm looking at it.
All right, the other big topic that was talked, and we'll get to the bomb in a minute. We'll sort of finish with the main event. I mean, a lot of it was leading up to what we've all been talking about. Coaching change. I mean, Blake Wheeler had mentioned earlier at the end of the season he'd probably have a little bit more to say on that, and we'll get to Blake. But Mark Scheifele as well, a guy that had basically been glued to Mark. He was Paul Maurice's guy for a long time, and many of us thought that maybe to the detriment of the team. So it was logical that people would ask about Mark Scheifele as to how he reacted to the resignation of Paul Maurice just before Christmas.
Yeah, it was tough. It was tough for a lot of guys. A lot of guys. I think pretty much every guy, unless they came from a different team, only knew Paul. That was kind of all we knew, and for that to happen, kind of before Christmas was tough on a lot of guys, and something you can't really prepare for unless it actually happens, and then it happens, and you kind of don't know how to react, and I think a lot of guys feel that way.
All right, and that was something that we heard from a number of players. I mean, it did seem right now, and I guess those of us on the outside watching the way the team was playing, considering the tenure of Paul Maurice, the way the team started, and then some of the ugly losses, especially on home ice. I mean, it was pretty clear that, that was untenable going forward and something needed to change. Now, many people thought that Maurice might get fired. And I know that was touched on later on today, and we'll get to it with Kevin Cheveldayoff. But that did not happen. Many walked away. And, Dave Lowry moved over from the assistant coach's job, in the morning into the afternoon, being on the bench. And obviously everyone's quite well aware that the results didn't follow. But at this point, things got really interesting. Those were questions about the season. And, again, like often, we didn't get a ton. The final two clips that we're playing were why Scheifele's still trending on Twitter right now, why we're going to be talking about this situation probably until there's some sort of clarity at some point during this offseason. But number 17, Reem, asking him if he wants to be in Winnipeg and what he sees for his future.
Obviously I love it here. It's been the only place I know. I obviously think there's a lot of big questions to be asked this offseason, about where the team's going and what's all going to happen, and that'll, happen tomorrow. And, I'd love to be in Winnipeg, but, I also have to see where this is all going and what direction this team's going in, and I guess we'll see this summer.
So that was a bit of a jaw dropper. I think everyone say, well, we're going to have to see how things going. It's important to note, the comparing the comments of Scheifele and Stastny yesterday. I mean, if you had brought someone in and said, that follows sports but didn't know this team, and played the comments of Paul Stastny beside the comments of Mark Scheifele and said, which of these two guys do you think is an unrestricted free agent at the end of the season? And which guy has 2 years left on his deal without any ability to renegotiate anything or without any real control? I guarantee you 95% of the people would say Paul Stastny sounded like the guy that was on this team long term, or that was coming back, as opposed to Mark Scheifele. And it all led to the final question. And folks, while you're playing this, why don't you give us in your chat your first reaction to what you heard from Mark Scheifele, no matter what side of this debate, if you want to call it that, what your thoughts were going forward, what you thought in. If you're with us on YouTube, hit us up with your comments as to your reaction when you heard this. Mark Scheifele on what he wants to hear in his exit meeting today with the Winnipeg Jets.
I think I just have to know, I just have to understand where this team's going. You know, I'm in the prime of my career. You know, I still, you know, I still have so much to improve on too, and I like where my game's at. I like, you know, the physical nature that my body's at, and I think I'm only improving. I'm only getting better. I'm only gonna be a better player next year than I was this year, and I just have to know where this team's going and what the direction is, and you know what the changes are going to be, if any, and you know, I have to think about my career and my, you know, what's going to be best for me, and I think those are going to be, I'm going to have, you know, talk to my agents and everyone in my family and stuff like that, and figure out what I really want, and so it'll be a tough talk tomorrow.
It'll be a tough talk tomorrow. I'll tell you what I thought right away. I thought that it was maybe even more clear. And again, I tweeted this out yesterday. Anyone that's been paying attention to this team, listening to what the players have said, although we've heard almost very little from Mark Scheifele, especially for a guy that, you know, was a leader of this team, the assistant captain, strapped to the hip with Blake Wheelers, the leaders of this club, the culture carriers, if you want. I mean, that sounded to me like a guy that had checked out a long time ago. And when you say, oh, it's going to be some really tough situations, I mean, this is sort of like what I said before, Remis. I mean, that sounded like a guy that's saying, I'm asking for a trade without asking for a trade. It was just the first time it had been so obvious to us in front of a microphone. But to be honest with you, this level of engagement at times this year, I think spoke to exactly that. On the ice. I think that Mark Scheifele's off-ice demeanor and on-ice demeanor at times has been going in the wrong direction for a long time. Tons of people have asked me after that tweet yesterday, when did this happen? Some people say it's the coaching change. Some people say, oh, it has to do with the Montreal media and the aftermath of the hit on Jake Evans. I think this has started a long, long time ago. And I've mentioned this and I've quoted this a number of times. Think back to the exit meetings 3 years ago at the end of the 2019 season after the loss to St. Louis. I mean, I think it was pretty clear something had gone rotten with this club at that time. And, you know, whether there's all sorts of speculation that this was a big part of why Patrik Laine is no longer a member of the Winnipeg Jets. You know, there was too many guys that were, you know, star players, if you will, coming in, and there wasn't enough oxygen in the room, and the Winnipeg Jets ended up, you know, making their decision. And you know, unfortunately, if it does come down to this, and Mark Scheifele, I just say this personally, if these signs were there that this was going to happen, you wonder if you could pump the true serum into some of the key players, particularly Kevin Cheveldayoff. You wonder if they don't wish that they had maybe come to some realizations, some hard realizations earlier, and how maybe things would have gone differently. Because I, for one, think that all of this is tied together. Patrik Laine leaving, bringing in Pierre-Luc Dubois, and now to the point that, you know, Mark Scheifele is saying everything that you would expect from a player that doesn't want to be here and, you know, is looking for a change of scenery. And to be honest, I mean, as much as we were kind of focused on this from a team perspective, and, you know, I've been speculating that for a while he was no longer untouchable. When you look at the contracts of this team, the deal that probably makes the most sense to a significant change to the core, to, you know, rising up some of the other players that are ready to become the real leaders of this team. I think all of that makes sense now, but to be honest, maybe if this had come earlier, we wouldn't be in the situation that we're at right now, because this team is still very talented. This team still has big league players, guys that can score goals, and one of the best goaltenders in the National Hockey League. I mean, we'll talk about the defensive systems and the way the defense played, and a lot of that goes to Charlie Huddy and Dave Lowry and back to Paul Maurice. But talent-wise, the talent is there, and that's what's made this that much more frustrating, I think, to everyone watching as it's happened. But I don't think this is that surprising to anybody. Maybe it was surprising in the way it was so forward that Mark Scheifele actually said something, but it's clear that all is not rosy, especially with the guy that Paul Maurice famously said at some point they'd be building a statue at one point. Remo, fill me in on your reaction to what you thought when you heard those statements, especially that last one, which was the money shot, if you will, amongst everything we heard from Scheif yesterday.
I was pretty surprised. You know a guy who's he's an assistant captain. He's got 2 years left on his contract. You would think the easy answer would be, I'm signed here for 2 years. I know it was a tough year. We're going to try to figure it out. To hear someone, with that position on the team say, I need to talk to my family and my agent. I mean, what is he talking to them about? I understand wanting to know the direction of the team and being concerned. That could be meaning who the coach is going to be. But, you hear Paul Stastny, as you said, and we'll get to that, talk about accountability. And everyone in chat is pointing out Scheifele saying a lot of me comments. I think you should be concerned. And then I started thinking about, Scheifele's really had, we mentioned it, tough ends of season. We had in the bubble, the injury. Last year was the hit on Jake Evans, and he had that press conference. And then this year, this one. And then even after 2019, a lot of people were talking about just his demeanor during the press conference with Blake Wheeler. But
he sulked for 10 minutes and let Wheeler answer every question. Yeah. I mean, it was the worst body language I can remember maybe at any point of any player in the 11 years for a guy that's supposed to be maybe the key guy to moving things forward. To see him there, I mean, it was obvious that something went wrong. And listen, I know there's a lot of criticism, and I have a bunch of it too, for them not understanding and realizing this earlier and doing something about it earlier. And that certainly falls on the general manager and the organization. But I also think that they truly did believe that Mark Scheifele was a guy that they could get back to the level that he played in 2017-18 when, he scored 14 goals in 17 playoff games and was one of the biggest reasons why the Jets had their greatest success so far in the National Hockey League. You add in the nature of this organization to try to stay the course. They believed in Mark Scheifele from the day one that they traded him. And it's easy for me to sit here and say, read the room. And for those of us that watch the team every day going, something's not right, they've got more information than any of us do as to what's happening. And I'm sure they worked very hard to try to alleviate that. But I don't know, Remis, it's hard. It was hard, I think, for anyone, even the staunchest, even the guys that have been giving me a hard time for even talking about, maybe they have to make a significant move in trading Mark Scheifele. Pretty hard to look at that yesterday and think that this is a guy that's committed to this team. For all the other guys that have been talking about the team, and we've heard it a million times, that was the most that was all about him, his personal situation. And I get it. It's team sports, it's professional sports, and you want to be in a good situation for yourself going forward. He's got a contract. He is part of this team right now. And the accountability that we heard everywhere else amongst this dressing room in interview after interview over the last little while was completely absent yesterday. And there was nothing about the team, as it were. It's about what the team is going to be doing for him. And I don't know, from my opinion, I think anyone that was even on the fence got a pretty good dose of reality yesterday in what, in all likelihood, could very well be Mark Scheifele's final comments as a member of the Winnipeg Jets.
Yeah, when you start with it, I like it here in Winnipeg, but, and, you hear the me comments about him being in his prime, what's best for him. I thought it was a bit of a contrast from what he said last year. At the end of the season. And I threw this clip up on Twitter. I don't know if you saw it, but it got a lot of reaction. I can play it here.
I did. Yeah, play it right now because we just heard what Scheifele had to say at the end of this season. I mean, you nailed it. I mean, it was about a complete 180 for the way and what he had to say after the end of last season, which of course, maybe the most significant moment to the end of the Winnipeg Jets season was a terrible decision by Mark Scheifele. They got him suspended for 4 games. Ended up costing him the rest of the playoffs. And when the Jets got swept, having to miss the opening game of this season, kind of dragging on into this year.
What happened in Toronto, that's learning lessons. That's coaching. That's, a player, I'm a guy that loves to learn. I'm a guy that loves to improve my game. And I want the coach to push me. I want my peers to push me. That's what makes good teams. That's what makes, that's what bonds, relationships is your peers, the forms of authority pushing you for more and pushing you for better. And that's that's hockey. That's the business we're in. You want to be pushed to be better. You want to be pushed to be a better person, a better player, a more hardworking player, everything in this world, you want to be pushed to want more. And, that only motivates you. That only motivates me as a person. And, that's the way I look at every setback, at every good thing, at every bad thing. You never can get too high. You never can get too low. You just have to keep pushing for more. And, I thought this team pushed for more. We were written off from day one of this season. We have that's about it. We were written off from day one, and we proved people wrong all season long. And, we go through that slide, towards the end of the year, and we were written off again. Everyone wanted a Calgary Flames Edmonton Oilers series, and, we proved people wrong. We made the playoffs. We won our first round. And, I think that's where my head's at, is that, we prove people wrong, and we want to continue to prove people wrong. We don't get a lot of respect in the grand scheme of things. Everyone wants the, Toronto Maple Leafs and the Edmonton Oilers, and the Montreal Canadiens to be going on. No one wants the Winnipeg Jets to do anything. But, that's that's what Winnipeg is made of. Our community is made of hardworking people that grind for every inch. And, we're that team that wants to grind for every inch and prove people wrong on a day-to-day basis. And, that's who the Winnipeg Jets are.
That was the same guy. That we just heard talking about there. It was about, this team, this city, a lot of things that I think a lot of people really appreciated. And listen, it couldn't have been much more different yesterday. And that is a major issue for this team going forward. But I think if anything, it's a good thing for the Winnipeg Jets because, I mean, as I said before, I think that it was pretty clear that something wasn't right. Things needed to be changed. And I'm not sure whether Mark Scheifele was on board with what had been happening. And we'll hear some incredible comments from Paul Stastny coming up in a second in relation to that. But it happens in pro sports. Nothing's forever right now. And I know that this organization, and Paul Maurice mentioned, the thought was that Mark Scheifele was going to be a Jet for life, play out this contract, stay here, do great things, win cups, get a statue put up, and be sort of, the next guy. The guy like his mentor, Dale Hawerchuk, was when he was here. Dale Hawerchuk got traded too. So it just really, really does seem like we are on that point. Now, we're going to go for Mark Scheifele. A lot of this will be connected to Mark Scheifele because a number of other players talked, and it was hard not to know that 55, I think, was being alluded to or part of some of the issues that this Winnipeg Jets team had. We'll get to Stastny right now. Do want to thank Culligan Water. We gave a big shout out to Kenny for being the most hydrated guy. Kenny had the scoop yesterday that Chevy got the extension. So we'll give a couple extra Culligan chugs to Ken. Culligan Water, of course, locally owned, 65 years in business as the go-to people for all things water in Winnipeg. The water softeners, filters, bottled water coolers, whole home systems, drinking water systems, citywide water delivery services, as well as commercial and industrial water products and solutions. Whether it's for the home, the cottage, or the office, Culligan has your water needs covered. Give them a buzz at 694-5180. Visit them at 1200 Sargent Avenue or online at drinkculligan.com. Hey, our friends Donnie and the gang at Manitoba Battery are, of course, the premier place in Winnipeg to satisfy all your battery needs because they save you time and money. Here's a little example. When you're shopping for your next battery, you need a deep cycle battery for your camper. You can go through the whole prospect of driving to Costco, finding a parking spot, walking into the store, finding the battery on your own with no help, carrying that battery to take out about an hour, and you'll spend $125 minimum. Or you can call Manitoba Battery, order the same battery for $15 less. They'll bring it to your door that same evening, and they'll buy your old battery for the $10. The whole process will take you less than 5 minutes and cost you $100. You'll save $25, an hour of your time, and you won't burn any gas, which these days is a lot. That's the kind of math that works for us Winnipeggers that love a good deal. You can find out more at manitobabattery.com or give them a buzz at 783-8787 to save yourself some time and money. And of course, the playoffs are beginning today. Royal Sports is your merchandise headquarters. I'm not sure whether there's going to be a clear out sale on Jets 55s anytime soon. That could very well be the case. But whether you're thinking about Jets gear, Bomber merchandise, NHL, NBA, Blue Jays, international soccer or more, Royal Sports has it all, as well as Canadian soccer gear coming in. And now we're just about getting ready to get some good weather and get back outside. Softball, baseball, soccer, best selection in town, an incredible growing number of bikes available each and every day, and an expanded fitness section. They really do have it all. It is the Superstore, 750 Pembina Highway, Royal Sports. And make sure to follow them on Instagram right now at Royal Sports Pembina for all the latest merchandise drops, sales, and info on their next world-famous tent sale as well. Royal Sports, 750 Pembina Highway. All right, getting back to the Winnipeg Jets. Paul Stastny was fascinating, and there was one particular comment that stands out. But quickly, Remo, let's get number 6 and number 10 in first. Before we get to Paul Stastny really speaking to the topic that I think everyone was talking about. I mean, Paul Stastny referred to him plenty as the conscience of this team. I think with where this team is at right now, it is imperative that Paul Stastny help make Stastny the coach, considering what we heard the last little while. He is a free agent, though, and he was asked about his pending free agency, despite all the things he talked about, sounding like he still was absolutely a member of the Winnipeg Jets.
Yeah, I mean, right now for me, just I think I gotta take a vacay with the wife. It's been 2.5 years since we've gotten away from the kids, but no, I've always said everything's always on the table. I've learned to keep an open mind. I think you just never know, whether you don't know who the coaches are going to be, who management is going to be, who's making trades. So you kind of want to stay aware for that, and you obviously want to go somewhere. As you get older, you don't have as when I was 28, I was free agent. It was different. Now that older, you don't have as many teams interested, but you just hope there's teams interested, and then you go from there. But I've said it before, and because I've been through it, it's easier for me to kind of just wait it out as long as I can and just kind of see. I think take a couple of weeks off now to kind of let everything settle. If the body feels good, if I can keep playing, then that's what I want to do. And then want the family to be happy. I think want the fit to be happy, but kind of all kind of options are on the table, and I don't close the door anywhere I've been.
All right, so there's Paul Stastny, and he mentioned at his age too. I mean, you want to know that people want you and find a situation. I think it's quite obvious that there is a path for Paul Stastny to return here. But much like we've heard a number of other players, there are some things that need to change, and you can make your own. I mean, certainly, I think the coaching staff and having a new voice is important, and they didn't really get that. I think it's pretty clear. Moving on from Paul Maurice to Dave Lowry, with an internal hire that happened the same day, albeit with that 2.5 week sort of, buffer as the league shut down. But I think it's also about personnel. And we'll hear, the most damning comments about, where this team is at and what needs to change in just a minute. Paul Stastny, he did speak about free agency. He was very complimentary on Nikolai Ehlers and his becoming a leader. But let's get to number 9, Remo, because this was the question that I think opened up people's eyes. It's just how starkly different it was from what we heard from Mark Scheifele. And these were the comments I'd say. Listen to what Mark Scheifele said, a guy with 2 years left on his deal, and Paul Stastny, a guy that had just talked about pending unrestricted free agency. Murat Atesh asked Wheeler about, some of the systems that the team was utilizing this year. And Paul Stastny basically barged into the conversation, although it was a very welcome interruption, and talked about the lack of accountability, both to each other as well as the team that plagued this team this season. And you can judge for yourself on who Paul Stastny was talking about.
I feel like I'm jumping on the end of what you said there, the idea of them finding a system and playing to it. I mean, take the opposite of that. Is that a clear sign that Winnipeg didn't do that this year?
I think it's just a clear sign that our players didn't play to our system. I mean, like I said, responsibility lies on the players to whatever is put in front of us to execute it, and we didn't do it.
But that's also, as players, let me jump in here, is we got to be held accountable, whether it's player on player, and we got to have more respect for each other. And when you don't have that, when you don't care about the teammate next to you potentially, and you just care about what you're doing or certain individual things, that kind of starts bleeding in the game. If guys are held more accountable, if there's more respect for each other. I'll give you an example. Who was it? It was Vancouver. I think they lost the game in overtime for like 10 games ago, and Boudreau called out one of their players. And it sucks. It sucks when something like that happens. But that player, I think the next game they played, that same team had 3 points, was +3. The next game he was better defensively. Like, all it takes is one time to get embarrassed, and everyone hates it. And it's happened to us, whether it's in juniors or college or professional, and you learn from that mistake. But that's what needs to happen. But you also have to have like self-awareness. You also have to realize that sometimes you do have to sacrifice a little for the greater of the team. And I just hope that guys realize every year. I think if you look on paper every year, probably, at the start of the season, you look at every lineup and you think, wow, that's a good team, no matter what. It doesn't even matter. All 30 teams, 31, however many teams there are, 32 teams, 31. So that doesn't matter. I think all the skills there, but it's the teams that are bought in. I look at Calgary, for example, this year, and their coach there. I don't know what people say about him, but he might be hard nosed, or he might be holds guys accountable, because you look at some of those players there. They play a whole different game than they did last year, and they're a dangerous team, and they play a complete team game. And when a good team game follows, then all the individual success kind of goes along with it. So for here, it's kind of a wake-up call. Realize that it's not going to be easy every year. Yeah, you've had some young guys that maybe didn't make playoffs the first year, but every year they've gotten better and better here for, you probably tell me, the last 8 years. So it's easy, but then all of a sudden when things go tough, we'll see how guys react and respond. And I think it's always kind of a good learning experience for everyone, and hopefully they kind of take that pill, learn from it in the summer, and make adjustments and realize you don't want to be in this position, because it stinks, especially tomorrow when you're watching playoffs and you see how electric the atmosphere is and the fans are, and you just wish that you were there, but you're not.
Well, that to me might be the most incredible quote that we've seen in a long time around here in Winnipeg, maybe at any point. When you hear a player that is respected like Paul Stastny in that dressing room saying that some players didn't have respect for their teammates, it just goes to show you how broken that locker room is. And, it's easy for us to sit around and people in the media or people in social media and say, oh, this looks like this happening. That was pure confirmation that many of the things that we had been seeing were exactly as they were. And to be honest, it sounds even worse than, maybe what you get from the odd, media availability, or certainly what we see on the ice. But Remis, to me, that was the jaw dropper. And the way that was a question for Blake Wheeler. Paul Stastny, it seemed like he felt that he needed to say that right now. And, the comments about, maybe guys being aired out. And I know Dave Lowry said he's never going to do things through the media. But to me, my reaction to that was they had tried everything with certain players. And you can all figure out who you think he was talking about without any, and that's the last resort, I think. When players, get aired out by their coach, in the media, he said exactly that. Sometimes you need to get embarrassed. And that never happened. They didn't get the buy-in. They didn't get the turnaround. And that led us to yesterday when we heard comments from Mark Scheifele and Paul Stastny about as polar opposite as you could possibly have. But to me, that was incredible. I think most people can have their own speculation as to who they're talking about. And considering he said that, and then Mark Scheifele came out with his comments that we heard earlier about 15 minutes later, I think told you all you need to know about the state of the Jets dressing room, the state of the Jets leadership core, and where Mark Scheifele fits in amongst this team that he was thought to be the key franchise linchpin for so many years.
Full credit to Paul Stastny, who's been so candid with his comments, not just this year, but going back for the last couple of years. And shout out to him. He did have a career season in points, mid-40s. I think that's the most he had since he was with the Blues. And, I can't say I was too surprised to hear him. We've heard a lot of stuff, him saying last year that they weren't playing the right way. They were cheating the game. They had been cheating for a while. And that was when they went on that huge losing streak to end the season. And for him to butt in for a question that wasn't directed at him and talk about accountability being needed in the room, and that's something we've been talking about here for weeks now. I think it's refreshing to hear you like hearing that. And I did put out a poll. Would you like to see Stastny back on the Jets? And I think he's become a fan favorite here in just a short time. 93% of almost 200 people who voted saying yes. Now, I think the big question is, will he come back? And if he does, how much is it going to cost and how many years? Because he's a player, on the other side of 30. But he did just have a great season. He did have some nice chemistry there with Wheeler and Ehlers. But, a lot of people in chat, being like, I wonder who he's talking about here in these comments. So, so we've heard if to use wrestling term, Mark Scheifele went heel, Paul Stastny playing the babyface role here.
Yeah, Stastny had quite a season when it comes to wrestling style heel and babyface turns right now. But make no mistake about it, he was the guy. I mean, he spoke, and as I said, I kind of half jokingly said, "Oh yeah, make sure it was Stastny the coach." That is exactly what you would have hoped to have heard at times from Paul Maurice. Listen, I don't think Dave Lowry was ever in a situation where you come in as an interim coach, your kid's on the team. I mean, it wasn't a great situation, and I'm not sure whether they expected more or whether they simply expected that Maurice leaving might, get things turned around. But the bottom line is what we just heard from Paul Stastny, and I think it's way more impactful, to be honest, coming from the dressing room, coming from one of the players on the team than even a head coach. But it's quite clear that there had been a real lack of accountability. Some players, maybe talked a good game, but didn't hold themselves to a standard, or just simply weren't on board with what has happened. And listen, Adam Oates, I'll say this, Adam Oates, who of course is the personal coach of Mark Scheifele. I mean, this is a guy that, they're focusing on individual things, skills training. We didn't hear anything about the team. And it's sad because for such a long time, that's exactly what we heard from Mark Scheifele. It seemed like he was, the core of this team that they were building around. And, there's obviously been some significant things that have really changed over a number of years, but I think have really come to a head at this point, as we heard yesterday. Remo, before we go, because Wheeler was up with Paul Stastny, we're going to bring Mike McIntyre in just a second. I do want to just a couple clips from Blake Wheeler, because we're going to certainly need to discuss his role in all of this with Mike as well. If you want to get number 4 and 5 ready, first up, Wheeler was asked on where things started to go south after a good start for the Winnipeg Jets, and here's what the captain had to say.
Nothing in particular stands out. Like I said, I think there were some things, we came into training camp talking about the way we wanted to play the game. I'm not exactly sure if, we were doing that per se in those first games or not, but maybe the intention was there. I think we were playing fast. We got a forward group that can move really well, and we got a defensive group that can move the puck really well, so it seemed to be like it was going to be a great fit, and obviously our goaltending speaks for itself. So, nothing particular stands out, but I just feel like, for stretches of the year, just felt like we were just bogged down, just stuck, just playing slow, just in a rut.
All right, that was 4. You spoke about being in a rut, and that I'll certainly agree with. Now, Wheeler certainly, and this has been his MO really over the last little while. I mean, the last number of years as the captain. I mean, they may be fully aware of what's happening on in the dressing room, and really Paul Stastny, Nikolai Ehlers, Kyle Connor have been the guys that have come out and called it the way that it is. And Blake, for better or worse, keeping things in house and not really addressing the things that I think if anyone was aware of, the captain of the hockey team certainly would be. But one other clip that we, and Blake Wheeler teased this before. He said, at the end of the season, he'd have something more to say about Paul Maurice's departure and the effect that had on that team. That's clip number 5, Reem. Before we bring in Mike McIntyre, let's hear from Wheeler on Maurice leaving and how that affected this year's Winnipeg Jets.
Yeah, it was obviously a shock. Can't speak to what would have happened if Paul would have stuck around. It's one of those, another one to add to the list of what ifs. When your coach packs up and leaves, halfway through the season, it certainly is a jolt to the group. And like I alluded to at the time, it's not the type of jolt where he lost the room and we weren't responding to his message, or we were just counting down the days till he was leaving. It was one of those things that kind of, I think, hit deep for a lot of guys. So whether that completely derailed our season or not, I suppose I'm not sure, but it was something that was, it was a shock to the system for sure.
I'll say this about that comment. I mean, I'll sort of take issue with it. If the team was responding to Paul Maurice's message, they sure had a funny way of showing it. I mean, the team was in free fall at that point. They'd had some of the worst losses of the season, finishing up with that ugly home loss to Detroit, or to the Buffalo Sabres on the 14th of December. And anyone that was watching this team knew that things were going poorly. And I'm sure Paul Maurice, as the head coach, was doing what he could do, and he felt that they weren't responding, and that was part of the reason why he left and said that they needed a new voice. So that was a little interesting. Anyways, we're going to talk about this all with Mike McIntyre coming up right now. Huge numbers in the show today. Welcome to everyone. If you're new here, do us a favor, hit that red subscribe button. We're here, and God knows this is going to be a hot off season, so we'll have plenty of time to talk with you every day live at 1:00 on YouTube. And of course, you can follow Winnipeg Sports Talk and subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your favorite podcast feeds. Do that. So Mike McIntyre coming up in just a second. Our friends at Aikens Lake are ready for the upcoming summer, and I can tell you that I believe there's still a couple of dockhand jobs. If you've got a university student, or he and a buddy thinking about maybe living in paradise for 4 months, working with some great people in one of the most amazing spots in our province, Aikens Lake Wilderness Lodge. Get on that right now. Limited availability. It's going to be their biggest summer ever. But you can find out more about available dates and a potential family or corporate trip as well at aikenslake.com. But in particular right now, looking to fill out that roster of young people working at the lodge for the summer. Find out more at aikenslake.com, or you can hit Pitcairn up at Aikens Lake. Breezy Bend is ready for golf season. Have you seen the forecast this week? I think we're going to be on the course in not too long as things dry up right now. Breezy Bend, an incredible golfing home for you and your family. Give Corey Johnson a call and find out how you can maybe join the growing group of Breezy Bend members. Working on a waiting list right now, but they'll have all that information for you about their junior programs, women's programs, the improvements to the golf course and the clubhouse. No better place to be for your golfing home than Breezy Bend. Find out more online at breezybend.ca. And our friends at Knott Auto Corp, I mean, maybe the roads have just taken a toll. You weren't thinking about getting a new car, but now you're potentially looking for a tank to handle the Winnipeg roads. Whatever your vehicular needs are, whether you're thinking electric with the great selection of Teslas they have there, or more traditional vehicles, why not get into the car of your dreams at a great price with the help of the Knott team? Just like Milt Stiegel cruising through on the Knott ad we've got playing on the YouTube channel. Knott has it all. Waverly and McGillivray. Find out more online on all their services and the Tesla Experience program over at knott.ca. And as we bring in Mike McIntyre, a big cheers to our friend at Little Brown Jug. We're into May. Spring is here. Patios are going to be open. Little Brown Jug has an amazing selection of delicious beers down at the tap room, as well as great events to participate in. Find out more on Instagram at Little Brown Jug, on their website at littlebrownjug.ca, in addition to getting the great taste of Little Brown Jug at beer stores throughout the city and at the tap room. They'll also deliver to you citywide Wednesdays, Fridays, and Saturdays. You can get that order picked up and won't even need to leave the house. It's all over at littlebrownjug.ca. All right, let's get to it. We've gone along. Normally we would do a guest beforehand, but we need to get a bunch. We'll hear from Kevin Cheveldayoff a little bit later on, but we will discuss his extension, the news on the coaching staff, and what we heard yesterday with Mike McIntyre, the Winnipeg Free Press. Mike, holy smokes. I get back to town. I get off the plane yesterday and just check social media afterwards. And I think we knew it was going to be an interesting end of year address from a number of players, but holy smokes. First off, let's just get right to it. You were in the room. What was your reaction, and what was the reaction of the collective scribes around as you heard Mark Scheifele finish off with the comments that we played earlier today?
Well, as soon as Mark Scheifele left the room, a bunch of us turned to each other
kind of confirm with each other that we'd all heard what we thought we'd heard. It's one of those where maybe he misspoke, or maybe you heard it slightly differently, but no, we very quickly kind of all confirmed that Mark Scheifele did say what we kind of thought he said, and that will go down as perhaps the most surreal, garbage bag day interview we've seen. And Mark Scheifele's been involved in a couple of them. Who can forget the one after the 2019 first round elimination to the Blues? You'll recall that was the day that Mark Scheifele and Blake Wheeler were at the podium together, and Mark Scheifele barely said a word, and the body language was quite troubling that day, and a lot of folks were reading into what that might have been about. This time, Mark Scheifele didn't give us the silent treatment. He had a lot to say, but what he said certainly raised eyebrows. I imagine Huss, not just here amongst us who follow this team. I got to think, the bombshells, the grenades that he launched would have reverberated around the entire NHL. And I suspect there were 31 other general managers who were quite interested to hear what Mark Scheifele said, because, well, he didn't flat out come out and demand a trade. That sure sounded like a trade request, a public trade request to me. Mark Scheifele spoke like a guy who is an unrestricted free agent this summer, free to go to the highest bidder, not like a guy who is under 2 more years of contract. And I think that's why a lot of us were rather puzzled by the language he used and just the tone of that whole news conference, because he certainly sounded like he has 1 foot out the door and is anxious to get the second one there as well.
Well, Mike, and I said this off the bat, and I'm sure we've heard this repeated ad nauseum by folks, on their Twitter feeds or whatever after they saw this. I mean, if you had brought someone from outside and just said, hey, here are 2 players speaking at the end of the season, one guy's an unrestricted free agent, one guy's got 2 years left, would any of them have thought that, oh, Mark Scheifele's the guy with 2 years on the contract? I mean, the contrast between what Paul Stastny said on a question asked to Blake Wheeler,
right,
and what said Mark Scheifele was stunning. And I think it just speaks to what we've talked about on this program for a long time. It's quite obvious that all was not right within that dressing room, within that leadership core, and it was in all caps right in our face yesterday afternoon.
It was, and Mark Scheifele has taken criticism, and I would say in some ways he's been labeled as a bit of a selfish hockey player, because of the fact that what he's capable of, and there's so much more there, and he leaves you wanting, I think, so many nights. Yeah, the points are great, but it's his play in his own end and on the other side of the puck that, I think speaks volumes about why this team remains kind of stuck where they are. And, Mark Scheifele didn't exactly come out and pour cold water on the notion that he's a selfish player. He came out and talked entirely about himself. I've got to do what's best for me. I have to talk to my agent. I have to talk to my family. He made it sound, Huss, these year-end interviews with the GM are about the GM kind of, debriefing with the player. He made it sound like Kevin Cheveldayoff has an appointment with him to discuss, what Mark Scheifele feels needs to be done here when it comes to both himself and the organization. It was just, the whole thing was very odd. I'll say this. I mean, I guess good on Mark Scheifele for not hiding behind cliches or canned answers. Like, he came out and he certainly spoke what was on his mind. And I got to think that was pretty calculated on his part. Like, he had to know. He's a smart guy. He's a student of the game. He had to know in a hockey mad market like Winnipeg that those words were going to be amplified and dissected. And I imagine that's exactly what his intention was. I asked Kevin Cheveldayoff flat out this morning, or when he spoke to us a couple hours ago at noon, has Mark Scheifele asked for a trade? And Kevin Cheveldayoff said no, but it is interesting to note, Huss, and I imagine this was calculated as well, that Kevin Cheveldayoff met with us before he sat down with Mark Scheifele, not after. And that's probably a good thing from the GM's perspective. You know, there's a legal term out there called plausible deniability. And so Kevin Cheveldayoff, you know, if he had met with us after he just debriefed with Mark Scheifele, there's probably some things that he would have either had to flat out lie or deflect. In today's case, he could sort of just say, well, I haven't talked to him yet, so I guess I'll find out what that's all about. And of course, we're not going to get Kevin Cheveldayoff like tomorrow. It would be fascinating if we could kind of get him after the Scheifele interview, but I got to think that conversation with Mark Scheifele is going to be one for the ages.
Well, no doubt about it. And a couple of things on that, Mike. I'm not sure whether he clarified whether the agent had asked for a trade. I mean, I'm not sure whether Mark Scheifele said anything in particular.
True.
And again, I mean, there's a few better in the business of tiptoeing around something than Kevin Cheveldayoff. So we certainly won't rule that out. But I'm with you, and I said this at the beginning of the show. I mean, that was a guy that said, how do you ask for a trade without directly going out and say, I want to be traded? You do what you did yesterday. And to be honest, Mike, before we even got to the bomb at the end of his media availability, the comments from the first couple of questions about how I'm in the prime of my career, I like where my game's at, all of that stuff, to me, that was not a message to anyone here in Winnipeg. That was to 31 other general managers saying, hey, I've still got a lot in me. I obviously need a change of scenery, and I may be good for the team. I mean, it was essentially a sales pitch for his services elsewhere in the league.
It was. And again, you know, contrast that with what we've seen from a lot of players over the last week coming out and talking about the need for looking in the mirror, for, you know, self-improvement, self-growth, for sort of hard reflection.
How about some self-awareness, Mike?
Right. And there just wasn't a whole lot of that. And, you know, the Scheifele interview alone would be concerning enough. But then, you know, another shoe sort of fell when Dave Lowry met with us a few minutes after Mark Scheifele. And Huss, you probably picked up on this, but Dave Lowry said Mark Scheifele has a decision to make. And I wish one of us were able to follow up on what he meant by a decision, because again, he is not a unrestricted free agent. He's not a restricted free agent. What decision does he have to make, unless he's talking about, does he decide to not show up to camp and violate his contract? I mean, or is he talking about he has a decision as to whether he wants to commit to playing a better all-around game? Or is that in reference to he has a decision to make as to whether he wants to ask the organization to move him? I don't know. I'm not going to put words in Dave Lowry's mouth. But again, the fact that he's talking about a decision that Mark Scheifele has to make, Mark Scheifele has no power right now. So I found that a curious bit of phrasing. And it only kind of adds to the overall intrigue of the whole situation.
You know what? We didn't get a chance. Remo, if you can, pull up 27, because that is a comment. We did want to get to it. You know, we spent a lot of time talking and hearing from Stastny and Wheeler and, of course, Mark Scheifele. This is the comment that Mike was talking about. You know, Dave Lowry, you know, he spoke about the end of the season and whatnot, but in specifically the final answer from Dave Lowry was quite clearly a little bit more of an open door into what had been happening behind the scenes. This is how it sounded yesterday.
I think the biggest thing coming out of what Mark said is that you know, he's going to have his meeting. He's going to have to go through the process, and then he's going to have to make a decision. That is, you know, that's something that I'm not going to control.
Mike, I mean, there it is for folks that missed it before. That is a comment. And again, we can't just listen to that without thinking about what we've heard from Mark Scheifele's teammates over the past couple of weeks.
Right.
Kyle Connor talking about building a culture. Paul Stastny and Nikolai Ehlers talking about buying into the team. I mean, there's a number of decisions. Do you want to be here? But regardless, I think the question that they've been asking that I don't think they got the answer is, do you want to be part of the solution, or are you going to be part of a problem? Because make no mistake about it, you can be the most talented player in the world. If you're doing your own thing and not buying into your team in a team sport, you know what you get? You get a disappointing season and you fall short of your goals. And guess where we are right now, Mike?
Well, for sure. And that's where, to me, Huss, it would have been fascinating, wouldn't it, if they'd switched up the partners yesterday? Like Mark Scheifele came out with Adam Lowry, Paul Stastny came out with Blake Wheeler. It would have been fascinating to watch the dynamic if Mark Scheifele had come out with Paul Stastny, who I imagine we might have got one of those side eyes there. And, I think you played this clip. I didn't catch it earlier, but where Stastny basically interrupts the captain and flat out says, I'm going to jump in here. And then
let me take this one, Blake.
Yeah, we've got to be held accountable, whether it's player on player. We've got to have more respect for each other. When you don't have that, when you don't care about the teammate next to you, and you just care about what you're doing or certain individual things, that starts bleeding into the game. By process of elimination, it's pretty clear who Paul Stastny was talking about. And as I say, it would have been something else if him and Scheifele had come out together. And again, it really adds to this overall feeling, Huss, of dysfunction right now within this organization. Like I'm not going to suggest it's at the Vegas Golden Knights level, but there's a lot of dysfunction right now, whether it's players publicly pointing fingers or kind of speaking in code. Mark Scheifele, what he did. I mean, the coaching staff now we find out kind of twisting in the wind, like they're not being brought back, but they're free to apply for their old jobs. And then, of course, Kevin Cheveldayoff getting the 3-year extension. Like this is, I'll put it this way, the most important offseason in franchise history is off to one hell of a turbulent start.
We'll get to the coaching staff and the Chevy extension in a minute. But back to the Stastny comments. That might be, and I mean, we've been talking for weeks about how open and somewhat damning on, what has been happening with this team for a long time. That, Mike, is the soundbite that I think probably needed to be said the most, and probably needed to be said from Paul Maurice way before he ended up leaving. And, for it to continue to fester to get to this point, I think is a real failure on the organization's part. And, Kevin Cheveldayoff certainly involved in that. And I think it also speaks to the the situation that Dave Lowry was put in, where, like, what are you going to do? You're an interim head coach and you're going to go all ranking and start being Tortorella. I mean, I don't think that was realistic. And I think they knew they were trying to hold things together as best as they could. But I mean, so obviously this was broken. This is something that I got a ton of feedback on my tweet yesterday. I mean, I said I wasn't surprised at all about these comments. Maybe the frankness of it, but the way that Scheifele came out, I mean, I think that was just it was an open window to something that had seemingly gone rotten a long time ago, which is stunning. I mean, if you had told me this 4 years ago that we'd be at this point, still with 2 years left in the deal, and, we'd be looking at Mark Scheifele as the guy that was most likely out, and frankly, to his own interest, has 1 foot out the door, I would have said, no way. I mean, this is all being built on, but it's obviously something's gone rotten. Assuming you agree with that, when did this happen? When did this start? I mean, I look back to the second half of the 2018-19 season. And I'm not sure. At times it looked like maybe things had gotten better, but I mean, you get into the COVID year, then last year with the Canadian division. I mean, the last 2 years, it's almost like it just kicked the can down the road. And this is the reckoning that has been long overdue for this hockey team for a very long time. From your perspective, where did this begin to go wrong?
Well, you're right. And you look at the different cracks, after that magical run in the spring of 2018, which seems like a lifetime ago. And who can forget what Mark Scheifele did in that second round against Nashville? He was the best. He was the best player in the National Hockey League. And, it looked like the sky was the limit for him and for his team. And you're right, Huss. I mean, we know that this team really took a 180 around the midway point of the following season. And, it led to closed door meetings and ruffled feathers and all that. And then, of course, Dustin Byfuglien isn't back. Brian Little, who I think really helped hold a lot of things together, probably behind the scenes. Brian Little, I've referred to him, and I know others have as well, as a bit of the conscience of this organization. And I think Brian Little being gone probably caused some other issues that maybe had been managed to start to fester within the room. Of course, Patrick Laine, we know what happened there, and reports of dynamic between young players and older players. And I think we saw a guy like Mark Scheifele, a guy, a sort of happy-go-lucky, carefree type who, just loved the game. We saw him change to a little more of a serious, reserved, sometimes angry individual. And we saw that manifest itself, of course, last year in that second round playoff series, and the absolute head scratcher against Montreal that really cost himself and his team that series. But even go back to the bubble, and he gets hurt by Matthew Tkachuk like pretty much first shift of game one against Calgary, and I gotta think that probably led to some anger from Mark Scheifele. Like, I just think his personality changed, and a psychologist could probably have a field day analyzing not just Mark Scheifele's sort of evolution, but the whole team here. And, again, we've seen it, as you say, in bits and pieces. Paul Maurice just up, flat out resigns, like out of the blue. Like, what caused that? And, we may never know the full story behind that, just as we may never know the full story behind Dustin Byfuglien. But it's clear that the culture that this organization talked about, how important it is, and what they were trying to establish, that didn't get built overnight. It also didn't crumble overnight, but it's clear that they are going in the wrong direction, and they have much work to do to start to repair it.
We'll look ahead to, this offseason, in particular, the Scheifele situation for Kevin Cheveldayoff, but we have to mention, and I know Ken broke it, you confirmed it yesterday, that Chevy has a 3-year extension. Some fans not pleased with this. Others that believe that, when you look at the drafting and most of the trades that Cheveldayoff's made, you can make the case that he hasn't done a bad job. But the fact of the matter is, this was all on his watch. And were you surprised that he's back? Are you surprised that it's a 3-year deal? And like me, do you agree that that deal was probably in a drawer for a while and was put out or kind of floated out at this time just to say, listen, we're going to be talking about a lot of things, but it's a non-starter. Kevin Cheveldayoff is the guy that's calling these shots going forward.
I'm not surprised for a couple of reasons. We know the loyalty of True North. It's one of their hallmarks. And I also believe, Huss, you and I have talked about this in the past, that ownership here in Winnipeg, they're a little more hands-on, a little more directly involved than maybe you would get in some other markets. And again, the Jets don't have that buffer between the GM and the owner. Like, there's no director of hockey ops, there's no Jim Rutherford or Brendan Shanahan, or you could go down the list. So I think, Kevin Cheveldayoff, yeah, he certainly got the power as the GM, but I think he also has the trust and the ear of ownership, and it's a two-way street. So in a lot of ways, I guess giving up on Kevin Cheveldayoff would probably almost be seen as an indictment of ownership itself, right? He was their handpicked guy. And you're right, you can certainly rattle off all sorts of things, successes, whether it's on the drafting and developing side to the retaining of core pieces, the Hellebucks and the Morrisseys and the Connors and the Ehlers and even the Scheifeles, like to really good team-friendly contracts. So I think all of that probably earns Kevin Cheveldayoff another look, not to mention, like, he's likely going to be on his 4th different coach under his regime. But what he's going to now do this offseason, he hasn't really had the chance to do yet. He kind of inherited Claude Noel because that was the True North choice, obviously, carry over from the Moose. The Paul Maurice change was done mid-season. there wasn't an exhaustive coaching search. And I think history would suggest that Paul Maurice worked out pretty well for what this team, started to build. And then, of course, Dave Lowry was an out of the blue kind of mid-season audible that had to be called. So, yeah, he's probably going to have a fourth head coach now under his watch, but this will really be the first time he can do an exhaustive off-season search. And he's also going to be bringing in, it would appear, an entire new staff, save for Wade Flaherty. So I think they're going to give him, another shot, and in this case, 3 years. That's the window. It's 1 year beyond, the Wheeler window, if you want to call it, and the Scheifele window now, which could close a lot quicker than 2 years from now. So no, I'm not entirely surprised. That being said, True North couldn't just send the message to the fan base that we're going to do nothing. And that's why I think you're seeing what's happened with the coaching staff here. They've got to send the signal to the fans that they are serious about, not just the status quo, same old, same old. And so I think we're going to see, dramatic changes certainly behind the bench, and we may see dramatic changes when it comes to the on-ice product as well.
Well, and let's get to the coaching staff today. I mean, the reports out from Frank Saravelli and Elliot Friedman, and confirmed by Kevin Cheveldayoff in his availability today, that a full search for a coach and coaching staff. And I think that is something that is incredibly important, because I was thinking about this morning. It is somewhat incredible that Paul Maurice came in when he did, and with the issues that they'd had in other areas, still maintained that same coaching staff all along. Because right. I would have thought if there was one guy that would have had the power to make those changes, Paul Maurice would have been the guy, and that never happened. And that's something I'll always wonder, because it would have bought them time, to be honest with you. I mean, some of the times where he was under the most heat with the performance of the club, even this year, I think that would have placated people for a little while and potentially could have improved the team, but that never happened. But it is significant to know that not only will there be a full search for a head coach candidate, but that person will be able to come in, with the exception of Wade Flaherty, and that makes a lot of sense because goalies are sort of in their own little
unicorns.
World. Yeah, exactly. But I mean, it's all led to this. I think it was the logical choice. I'm not sure everyone believed that it would happen, but the fact that, this is today, the day after the season, these reports coming out and confirmed by Kevin Cheveldayoff, I think speak to going forward. And as far as, listen, I think they're just doing what they would normally do, not saying, hey, everyone's fired, but, we're moving on. They've got the opportunity to employ. But that decision, in addition, personnel-wise, to what you're doing with Mark Scheifele, and assuming, I think many of us agree, myself, I've been talking about this for a while, that I think the Jets realized for a while that they needed to get out of the Mark Scheifele business. And to be honest, it's also the one move that has the potential to bring back a real significant return. But this decision on the coaching staff going forward, and how they come to that, who they interview, who they consider, whether it's just guys that they know, if you will, or a real legitimate exhaustive move that could take a while, I think is important. And this also speaks to the timing of, this extension with Kevin Cheveldayoff, whether it be announced, whether it was signed earlier or not. To fire the general manager right now, I mean, you basically can't do that. If they knew that they were going to move on from Chevy, they needed to do that a few months ago, like many other teams that weren't making the playoffs have done, so they don't get into this point, and then you're starting that biggest rock with everything else to come after that, considering the importance of these next few months for this organization.
Yeah, and again, to go back to something Paul Stastny said yesterday, Huss, that I found really interesting. You'll note he spoke of other coaching staffs around the league, and he specifically singled out two different staffs, one of which was a guy that the Jets probably might have had some interest in, except they were too late, if you will, on the Bruce Boudreau front. And, Stastny gave an example of Bruce Boudreau calling out a player after a rough game, and why he feels that is something coaches need to do, and how he believes it worked to the advantage of the player and the team. He then, of course, talked about the Calgary Flames and Daryl Sutter. And I do get the sense, and we've certainly heard this recently around the Jets, Huss, there's a belief, I think, that this was a better group than what they achieved on the ice, and that with a different voice, and Dave Lowry was a different voice, but he wasn't the different voice, that the Calgary model, if you will, of what the Flames were able to do this season compared to last, that is something that this Jets organization is going to take a look at. And that's not to say they're not going to make any changes. I mean, the Flames did make some changes. They lost their captain in the expansion draft, of course, and they brought in some players, but they didn't blow it all up. And here they are now, with a lot of the same core intact, the second best team in the Western Conference and a legitimate Stanley Cup favorite. So I get the sense that the Calgary model is something that True North is looking to as proof that we don't have to go nuclear here. We think we still got the makings of a really good team. Yes, we're going to have to make some changes. Some of them we may have to make that we weren't even planning, aka Mark Scheifele. But as you say, a Mark Scheifele trade would certainly fetch an impressive return. And the Jets would not be trading Mark Scheifele for futures. They'd be trading Mark Scheifele for contributing core player or players that can help now. And so, I don't get the sense that they believe their window is shut. They took a big step back this year, but, Kevin Cheveldayoff today said he expects they're going to spend to the cap ceiling again next year. And that would seem to indicate that they realize that in this market, and certainly, with the fans and the situation the way it is, they have to remain competitive, and they're going to do everything possible to get right back there.
Mike, let me ask you about Blake Wheeler's situation right now.
Mm-hmm.
I expect him to be back. I'll say that right off the bat. I mean, part of it is the fact that he's got a full no move at his age and what he's making for the next couple seasons. I think that is not an easy contract to move out, even if you had the willingness of the player to do that.
Right.
It was very interesting contrast between he and Paul Stastny standing next to it, when it was some of the things that Blake didn't say and some of the things that Paul did say. But we can't be having this conversation, especially involving Mark Scheifele, without acknowledging how joined to the hip for so long, 26 and 55 has sort of been, those are the guys that run this team, and then everybody else. It's sort of been interesting to see the way he and Paul Stastny and Nikolai Ehlers have clicked, and even Blake said yesterday, it's sort of too bad that it's over. I wouldn't have mind getting this going. Yeah. It seemed like there has been a real separation of those two, and you made comments as to, they were always the ones that were going out as the leaders that were meeting the media together. That didn't happen yesterday, and that hadn't happened over the last few months. Where does this leave Blake Wheeler, in your opinion, right now, considering there's, in all likelihood, a new full coaching staff going forward? Right. And I think the acknowledgement that it is time for a number of the young players that have had accountability, that have been saying the things that needed to be said, needed to be moving into those roles. Where do the Jets go here, and what is Blake Wheeler's role in being part of the solution if he is?
Well, you're right, Huss. I mean, breaking up Mark Scheifele and Blake Wheeler, which Dave Lowry did, and playing them on separate lines, like I thought in a lot of ways, we saw a rejuvenated Blake Wheeler down the stretch. And it's not just the points, and he scored a bunch of goals here at the end of the year to kind of finish strong on a personal level. I just saw a guy with a lot more jump. I saw a guy the last couple times that he met with the media, I detected a bit of a shift that Blake Wheeler seemed, I don't want to say that there was a weight off his shoulder, but I felt like there was a bit of a lighter tone, and a guy who, a little more reflective, a little more engaging, a little more personable than maybe what we'd seen, in the past. And I don't want to say that's just because him and Mark Scheifele, weren't on the same line anymore. I'm sure it's a lot more complex than that. But that being said, I did see a guy in Blake Wheeler who, found a role that's maybe a little bit different than the one he'd had and was really enjoying it. And so, I think there's still, look, he was still almost a point a game player. He can still do some things that I think are very valuable to the Jets. It's going to be obviously on a new coach to find a way to utilize Blake Wheeler to the best of his diminishing skill set because of his advancing age. But, I think, and Kevin Cheveldayoff referred to it as a legacy deal today. I thought that was an interesting term. He talked about some of the legacy deals that the Jets have handed out. Well, they've got out of a couple of them, like Dustin Byfuglien, Brian Little's, quote, legacy deals are a thing of the past, not because of anything the Jets really did. But Blake Wheeler's, for better or worse, I think they're stuck with it for these next 2 years. Is he going to produce like an $8+ million player? No. But I think everybody recognized when he signed the deal and why the team felt it was important to get Blake Wheeler under contract, coming off that impressive run that they had and the belief that even better things were around the corner. I don't think anybody can really hold that against the Jets. So now it's a matter of building around him. He's not the central piece. He shouldn't be playing, top line minutes anymore. But I think there's still a very useful player there. And it's going to be on the new coach to obviously, connect with the captain, assuming he remains captain. I don't know if that's a guarantee. Like maybe Blake Wheeler would actually prefer to not carry the burden of being the captain. There's other guys in the NHL. Dustin Brown, I remember when he had it removed, he actually spoke of how he felt a huge weight off his shoulders, and that was in Los Angeles, hardly the hockey mad community that Winnipeg is. So, I suspect a leadership review will be among the many things on Kevin Cheveldayoff's to-do list. I wouldn't expect to see Blake Wheeler not still wearing the C in the fall, but I think a reduced role, one that certainly taps into the skills that he still has, could serve this team well in the long run. And if you're Blake Wheeler, this is not the time to be selfish or to put you before team. Not that he does that. I think if anything, Blake Wheeler recognizes that time really is running out on his career and on this team's kind of window. And I would think Blake Wheeler would be at the front of the line to embrace change if it meant success, because really that's all that should matter. There isn't a whole lot more next year's for Blake Wheeler. The time is now.
You know what? It's funny you say that, Mike, because I think what we're seeing in front of our faces with, the comments over the last couple of weeks of players, and particularly what happened with Mark Scheifele, I kind of think that this has been accepted in that dressing room for a while now, that there were going to be some big changes.
Right.
That moving on from it being Wheeler and Scheifele and everybody else, that those times are over. We look at where that's got them. That younger players that are significant contributors right now have moved into leadership roles naturally and are ready to do that. And like I said before, I think we've seen sort of a splitting of it being, 55 and 26 and then everyone else. And I think Blake sort of got that earlier. And listen, he's not going to go and kill. Obviously, he didn't. I mean, he just sort of didn't really say very much and allowed Paul Stastny to go in and say many of the things that he needed to say. But I do think that Blake Wheeler can be part of moving forward and part of the solution. But I do think, to your point, I think it's important that it is in. And I'm not necessarily even going to say a different role, because I think whoever the coach is going to come in, he's going to have a clean slate, and he'll look at the players that he has and try and put the roster together and compile it the way it gives them the best chance to win.
Right.
But from a leadership perspective, for it being like, this is, Paul Maurice always said, this is Blake's team. They need to make everyone feel like it is their team. It cannot be all about that. And I think Wheeler's sort of gotten that. And I think we've seen that over the last couple of months, at least. Even despite, the back and forth that he had with Hamilton beforehand, I think that was a lot of the pressure of what was happening inside the room that maybe wasn't clearly obvious to everybody else, manifesting itself in a guy that had a lot on his shoulders. Whether or not he wears the C next year, I mean, I think that actually will be up for discussion, but I'll give him the benefit of the doubt that he could come in a different role like that and still be an effective player for the Winnipeg Jets. And, I think that will be very important, because even if you do make those changes, to have a buy-in of a guy like that, I think will say a lot to the rest of the guys in the room that they are all on the same page once you kind of move on from some of the guys that they've been talking about that, to use Paul Stastny's quote, haven't respected their teammates and the other guys in the room, which is about as damning an indictment as I could possibly say about a player in a team sport like the National Hockey League.
It is. And again, if they're speaking this way publicly, as many players have, imagine what's being said privately. And again, like, I would have paid.
And that doesn't happen overnight, by the way, Mike. I mean, I think that's why we've seen what's happened with this season. We've heard these comments before. I mean, now it's just sort of coming out. And to be honest, it's been glaringly obvious to anyone that pays close attention to this team on and off the ice for a number of months.
Yeah, clearly the culture's been broken. And in a lot of ways, Huss, it reeks a bit of, for too long, maybe the inmates were allowed to run the asylum, like to coin a phrase, and guys were maybe getting away with things. Guys weren't being held responsible for things. Leashes were really long, and it came back to kind of bite them. And now it's kind of rearing its ugly head. It's all bubbling to the surface, and it's not a good look, frankly, for the whole organization. One that I suspect, is causing no shortage of strife and probably embarrassment. We know this is an organization that prides itself on its brand, on its reputation. Well, right now that brand, that reputation has taken a significant hit, and much work remains to be done. But you're right. I mean, a guy like Blake Wheeler, at this point, he may have to reinvent himself a little bit. I suspect there's a bunch of players that are going to have to do that. And if it means, accepting slightly different roles, some of them, it might mean accepting a ticket out of town, right? Like, no stone should be left unturned. And the hard work in the offseason has probably only gotten harder of what's happened in this last 24 hours. But it should make for just, an absolutely fascinating, riveting few months of debate and discussion here till the puck drops again in October.
Turd Ferguson, let me in on the Stastny Ehlers text chain, please. Nicely done. Mike, before we go, we're going to hear some of the comments from Kevin Cheveldayoff that he had spoken just before we went on the air earlier today. But if you could, what did you take away from what Kevin Cheveldayoff had to say? There's been a lot of times where Chevy's come up and done some verbal manipulation and hasn't really said a lot. I mean, what did he say? What did you take away from it? And what can fans learn from what Kevin Cheveldayoff had for them this afternoon?
Well, we were reminded once again that he's the brother of a politician, because he certainly has that part down pat, where he says a lot but doesn't really say very much. I thought today, Huss, not to pat us collective media on the back, but I actually thought the questions today, I thought there were some really good, pointed, direct, important questions, that were thrown Kevin Cheveldayoff's way. And I think he tried his best, to give a little bit of insight without giving away too much. And so, I don't know that he revealed any state secrets today, and that's just not his style, and he's not about to change that, of course. I think, to me, we're kind of past the point now of the talk really is cheap around here. It really is. There's been a lot of talk. Actions will speak louder than words, and we'll see, I guess, what kind of actions Kevin Cheveldayoff and his staff have planned this summer. But they have their work cut out for them to not only repair the on-ice product, but repair the off-ice product. And I asked Kevin Cheveldayoff direct today, like, how much pressure are you feeling from your bosses to get this right? Because this team, this organization, they took a big hit. And Kevin Cheveldayoff conceded that there is a lot of pressure. They feel it. They're part of the community, and they recognize that the situation today is a lot different than it was just a few years ago. So, again, no bombshells were dropped by him. I wasn't expecting any, but it was an interesting 30-minute or so session, that's for sure. Just based on the nature of some of the questions coming his way. I think if you compare that to maybe other garbage bag days in the past, things were a little more direct today. I'll put it that way.
Mike McIntyre with this here. Hey, just one final one for you on the way out. And again, I think I asked you, I don't know, 2-3 weeks ago when we were talking about this, as it became more and more apparent where this was heading. The chances of Mark Scheifele getting traded. And I think you said something like 60% or 65%, and I was a little higher for that. And frankly, I was just couching it because I certainly thought that that's what they needed to do, but I wasn't sure, depending on what happened, whether they would do it. To me, the writing's on the wall right now. How do you see this playing out? How long do you think it takes? And assuming that Mark Scheifele is traded, what does that deal look like coming back for the Winnipeg Jets?
Yeah, I think
and thoughts on the market for Scheifele too. Some people speculate that what happened yesterday damaged his trade value. I actually think the other way around. I think the talent market, like, it's not like this guy has, I mean, in this market, people have watched him, and maybe the opinion of Mark has gone down somewhat. I think it certainly has. But hey, his numbers and his results are the results. And if anything, I think there's maybe more general managers today thinking, maybe Mark Scheifele would look good on our team than it was before. So I'm actually not in the camp that, if anything, I think more people are talking about, and the more people are interested, that might actually help a trade value of a key piece like 55.
Well, starting with the percentages, turn my 6 upside down and make it a 9. That's 90% is where I'd put the probability of a trade now. And I only give a 10% sort of window of not trading him. If that were to happen, Huss, there'd have to be some massive damage control, not only publicly, what he would say and what others would say, but my goodness, in that room. I think yesterday sealed his fate, frankly. But I also don't think that puts the Jets in a position where they're going to be taken to the cleaners by a team, because again, this isn't a situation where Mark Scheifele is a UFA next summer, where the Jets are handcuffed now because teams know they have him over a barrel. The Jets have to move him or they risk losing him for nothing. No, he's signed for 2 more years. The Jets don't have to trade him immediately. And I think there would be a massive bidding war for a guy like Mark Scheifele for the reasons you just point out, Huss. This is a guy who, by all accounts, those of us who watched him, had a major off year. The engagement was perhaps at an all-time low at times from Mark Scheifele, and he still put up 70 points in 67 games. He would have been close to a 90-point player had he played a full season. He can still go. He's in the prime of his career, as he said himself yesterday. If you don't believe it, just ask him. He'll tell you. He's still a very good hockey player, and he's signed to a deal that would have other teams salivating. His price point is so reasonable. So, again, if you're the Jets, you're not trading Mark Scheifele for draft picks or top prospects. You need to get something or some things back that immediately can step in and help you win. And obviously that you can control, cost control and term control. But I do imagine that Mark Scheifele on the open market would create a heck of a bidding war. For that reason, I don't expect something to happen really quick. Is it at the draft? I don't think the draft has to be a deadline by any stretch of the imagination, because again, I don't anticipate draft picks are part of a Mark Scheifele trade, because this isn't a rebuild that's going on where you'd then be, building for the future. But the draft, as we know, is where GMs are all under the same roof and a lot of business gets done. So, I would circle the draft in early July. I think it's the 7th and 8th this year in Montreal. But by no stretch of the imagination would I say it has to get done by then. I just think that that's when things might certainly heat up around Mark Scheifele.
Some people in the chat are saying, well, I mean, the Jets, Chevy doesn't rush into anything. They've got 2 years to trade him. I mean,
no.
There's no way you have this drag on into.
They have 4 months to trade him.
Yeah.
Again, if you're trading him, you're trading him before the season. You're not bringing that back into this situation. Absolutely. I mean, if the reason you're trading him is because of the whole situation, it's not because you're losing him next summer for nothing. If you're trading him, it's because the situation has become untenable, and so you got to move him sooner rather than later, aka before next season starts.
Well, this is why we've been discussing it all season long. The potential that even with a lost season at the deadline, it wasn't out of the question. Is
Right.
that the value of Mark Scheifele would have been at that point 3 playoffs in 2 more years.
Yeah.
The minute you wait into another season or another, I mean, regardless of what's happening here, and I think we've kind of laid it out that some significant changes need to happen, and that's probably at the top of the list. The other thing is, if then you're speaking about the value of the asset, the more time he's not with this new team, the less of a value is. So,
yep.
I think it's pretty clear where we go from here. You got anything to write about tomorrow in the Free Press?
Yeah, just a little bit. Jeff Hamilton and I have the team coverage in the paper tomorrow, and a couple more days probably of some Jets post-mortem stuff, and then be shifting to a whole bunch of other things here for the immediate future. Going to do some Moose coverage coming up. Of course, their playoff series starts Friday. Continue some Winnipeg Ice coverage. Got some Gold Eyes stuff coming up. Some golf, some Bombers, no shortage of action. And of course, we will continue to keep a wayward eye on the Jets throughout the offseason.
Yeah, something tells me there'll still be a few Jets columns coming up. I don't think it's going to be dull around this hockey club, despite the fact that the season is over. We've got to wait till next year. Mike, thanks for doing this. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Huss. Enjoy the week.
There it is, Mike McIntyre of the Winnipeg Free Press. We'll get to a few of Kevin Cheveldayoff's comments coming up in just a second. As I mentioned, May is here. Spring is, officially, it's going to be here a little later on this week. And we're just about 3 weeks away from the first day of live racing at Assiniboia Downs. Can't wait to do that. But before we start speaking about live racing, we got the Derby coming up this week. Kirk Antoine from Assiniboia Downs will join us coming up on Friday to get ready for the run for the Roses. Big thanks to our friends at Princess Auto, and commend them on everything they did with the extended hours late into the wee hours for helping people deal with another run of heavy rains and flooding over the course. Princess Auto, of course, great sponsor of the Bombers and the Gold Eyes, and the place where you'll find the best deals on the most unique assortment of tools and equipment around. Everything you need to complete the projects on your list or start something new is over at Princess Auto. 2 Winnipeg locations, Panet and Portage Avenue, or you can shop online 24/7, 365 over at Princess Auto. Well, the playoffs are here. We'll get to the playoffs and the cool bet lines coming up, but might be a great night to hook up with some fellas and ladies and get on down to a Boston Pizza Lounge to watch all of the playoff action. For my money, maybe the best 2 weeks of the season is the first round of the Stanley Cup playoffs. We have some amazing series, and you can watch them all on the big screen, along with some gourmet pizzas, Boston wings, ice cold schooners. And if you're staying home, check out their great game day deals online at bostonpizza.com and order for home delivery. Our buddy DQ Nick was in the chat earlier today. I'm not sure whether he's still around, but great to see him. And of course, the Nick and Nikki DQ group, and been waiting for spring and summer to come. It's always blizzard season in Winnipeg, but it's a little bit better when the sun's shining and the weather is nice outside. But in addition to the great taste of the blizzard at any of the 4 Nick and Nikki DQs, you're going to want to try the new Stack Burgers as well, which are drawing rave reviews. Visit them at the DQ Northgate, DQ Niverville, DQ Polo Park, or DQ St. Anne's. And all 3 Winnipeg locations right now available for delivery orders on all of the delivery apps. If you need a DQ cake for an upcoming event, hit them up on Instagram at DQ Manitoba, and they'll make sure they've got it ready for you as you wanted, any of the 4 Nick and Nikki DQs. All right. Remo, listen, before we finish off this Jets conversation for today, let's hear a little bit from Kevin Cheveldayoff, because it was reported, Ken Wiebe did it last night, that Kevin Cheveldayoff did have an extension, but he spoke about the season, the decisions on the coaching staff, and more. Here's the first clip, Chevy on his 3-year extension to continue being the guy calling the shots for the Winnipeg Jets.
Well, thanks very much. It's it's an extension that we agreed to actually a little while ago, and obviously we had some business to take care of with some of my staff, and haven't really been one to announce the terms of those. But I think over the course of time here, I think we've built an organization that has tried to compete for the Stanley Cup over the last couple of years, and again, I think that there's obviously lots of work to do here, continue to move forward and try and push this forward, and just very fortunate that I have the opportunity to and the confidence from ownership to move that forward.
Kevin Cheveldayoff, but we'll pick about a few of the key ones. Obviously the status of the coaching staff, with Frank Seravalli's report this morning was also top of mind. Kevin Cheveldayoff asked on where he and the organization go as far as both head coach Dave Lowry as well as the assistants.
So I met, late in the evening after, everything had kind of died down. I met with all the coaches. So I informed them that we're going to be conducting a full-scale interview process for a new head coach. And so I met with each of them individually. I met with Dave and told him that as well, and said to him if he wanted to be part of that formal search, that he had earned that opportunity. So we will grant him a formal interview process in that regard. I met with all the assistant coaches as well and told them that again, we're going to go through this process, and that there's a chance that they're part of that process moving forward when we finally select a head coach, but there's also a chance that it might not be there.
All right, so full search for a head coach is what many people were hoping to hear, including staff, and that's what we got earlier today. Moving on to Mark Scheifele, Cheveldayoff was asked about Mark Scheifele's comments from yesterday that we spent quite a bit of time today discussing.
Well, I heard a lot of, obviously a lot of passion, and I've heard a lot of passion from a lot of different guys in many different situations. It wasn't just, listening to him speak. I've listened and heard, obviously through, some of the conversations that you have had with the players over the past week, but also getting a chance to speak to, I don't think I've gotten through half of the guys yet, but through a lot of the guys and their thoughts and their meanings. Certainly with respect to Mark, he is a talented player. He's in the prime of his career. He is all those things that he said he is, and he's a Winnipeg Jet, and he wants to win. And as an organization, our vision is we're going to have to take a little bit of a reassessment here to see where some of the things are at. But our goal is to win the Stanley Cup. We've been a cap team. We've been committed to that. We've signed guys long term. Obviously you wish the cap maybe was a little bit more in our favor with respect to over the last couple of years, because we've probably been able to keep a few guys that have become casualties of those things as well. But that's the nature of the pandemic, with the cap being flat. Some of the legacy contracts didn't allow us to foreshadow where maybe we ran out of money, so to speak, to keep some other guys. So that vision hasn't changed. From a standpoint of wanting to win a Stanley Cup, we're just going to have to come at it and look at it from a little bit of a different perspective after a setback year like this.
All right, so there's a little bit more of Kevin Cheveldayoff. Passion was an interesting choice of words. I'm not sure whether that's what I would have chose to describe what Mark Scheifele had yesterday. But again, as Mike mentioned, it's important to note that when Kevin Cheveldayoff spoke today, only half of the interviews were completed and Mark Scheifele's had not taken place, which made it interesting when he was asked straight out if Scheifele has asked for a trade.
Just to clarify on Mark, he mentioned talking to his agent. Dave Lowry said yesterday that he has a decision to make. He's obviously under contract for 2 more years. Can you provide some insight into has he asked for a trade?
Yeah, no, he hasn't asked for a trade. I'll have a conversation with him during the exit meeting here, and I guess find some clarity.
All right, so he hasn't, but again, the exit meeting just about, and looking for some clarity this afternoon after speaking with the media.
Yeah, real convenient, Chevy, not to speak with Scheifele until after. I mean, come on, give us the info here. We're wondering. Couldn't they have scheduled for the first one? I think it would be an urgent thing. Then you can tell us. Now we're gonna have to wait forever to know.
I think we'll probably know relatively soon. Maybe not relatively soon. It might take a little while, but we're definitely going to know at some point how this one turns out. But are there any really many big questions after we heard from Mark yesterday? I doubt it. Cheveldayoff was asked about Paul Stastny's comments, which, as we mentioned with Mike, were some of the more jaw-dropping we've seen, talking about players needing to respect each other more. You don't hear that very often. Here's what the GM had to say on that.
I think, when you come into seasons, everyone's goals are to make the playoffs. Paul, your first question to me all the time is this going to be a playoff team? Are you guys going to make the playoffs? You want to put guys on record. They want to be on record to say this is a playoff team. Well, I don't think there's one guy in that room that didn't think it was going to be a playoff team. I think, the level of disappointment is because, we didn't even get beyond that. We didn't, so I think it goes back to the way I answered things earlier. There's some teams, they can say they're going to make the playoffs, and there's no shot that they're going to make it. They got, obviously you're in that evolution of your franchise where I shouldn't say no shot. Everyone's got a shot, because again, there's strange things that happen. But this group here, I think, genuinely felt that there was supposed to be more, and I think that's why you get the valley of the valleys of lows that we have here right now.
One other question that was interesting and I think was important to be asked was, about the leadership group overall, which of course Mark Scheifele has been a big part of. Cheveldayoff was asked about his leadership group and if it needs a change.
When you heard Mark talk yesterday, kind of a lot of individual, right? What's going to be best for me? What's going to be moving forward? He wears an A on this team. But you saw over the year, Blake, it's a burden to be the captain, but it seemed like it was weighing on him extra. He had a head coach leave because his message wouldn't get through. I'm wondering if there needs to be an internal look at the leadership group within this club and whether or not you'd be willing to go to a different voice than maybe the leaders you have now.
Well, I think, again, there's going to be lots of conversations amongst, whether it's the leadership group, whether it's, the other players. There's going to be, lots of conversations internally, and just because I got an extension, there's going to be lots of conversations between the ownership and myself and asking, where things went. I think there's lots of, questions that everyone's going to, want to answer. What the course of action moving forward is going to be. That's what we need to take the time here to figure out and make those hard decisions in that regard.
All right. We should get to the PLD question. One more. Tee up 37 if you could, Remis. It's funny because I don't even know if we mentioned Pierre-Luc Dubois once over the course of this show today. I think it's clear that, though, that is number one priority as far as retaining players. And Chevy was asked on discussions with PLD where things are at.
Very high. Obviously, did have a chance to chat with PL this morning already. So we had a good, candid, conversation. Last year was such a weird year for him. We really didn't even get a chance to sit down with each other until the, exits last year. So it was interesting and refreshing to get his perspective on things this year after having, one full year with the organization in a more normal setting. Again, he knows squarely where we stand, with respect to what we think about him and what we'd like to accomplish. The business side of the game will have to take care of itself. This goes back to a lot of different things. The business side of the hockey is in a different state right now with respect to the flat cap and stuff like that, and probably is going to increase over a period of time. So trying to have negotiations with players over short term versus long term and those type of things, there's lots of things that come into play.
He indicated it would be not a short process. Was that kind of the gist of your conversation with him too, then, that it would take some time?
Yeah, I assume so. The process in situations like this is, he's an ARB eligible player, so there's some, thought process and timeline, in those kind of regards. But, we got a lot of work to do.
A lot of work to do indeed coming off this season, that's for sure. But Kevin Cheveldayoff will be the guy making those moves. We discussed the 3-year extension a little earlier, and Cheveldayoff was asked about it. The final question he was asked today we've got for you is, from one of the members of the media asking, as to the vote of confidence and why he feels that he should be the guy moving forward after 11 seasons, no championships, and limited success coming off a very disappointing season.
Not a lot of GMs stay with the same team as long as you have without deep championship runs or titles. How do you view why you have this opportunity?
Well, again, I think that, these guys, we've built a strong core that, was a core that everyone felt could compete. We've had, we've had to make changes. We've had changes made. We've had Dustin Byfuglien retire. We had, the different situations where we've had to, move on from different guys from the cap. But we've also had situations where, you've had guys like, like Lowry that could have went to free agency that wanted to be a part of this and stay, like Pionk that could have went to, basically, got his way to free agency and chose to sign, a contract that we could fit in the cap. Like there's lots of good things that, we've been able to accomplish. And, we've been a team that has pushed, and unfortunately, we hit a roadblock here right now. So we're going to have to find a different way to overcome that.
All right, so there's the general manager of the Winnipeg Jets. As we mentioned, a little bit of tap dancing around a few things. The fact that he had not yet met with Mark Scheifele at the moment of that interview, I think was, important to note from Mike. But Remo, come on back in here for a minute. A pretty extraordinary 24 hours around this hockey club. But really, so much of this has been echoed by players over the last couple weeks. I thought Paul Stastny's comments yesterday were maybe the biggest indictment of what was happening within that locker room. And, the fact that Mark Scheifele talked about himself and that he needs to hear what's going forward, I think pretty much tells you all you need to know about the direction that this is going into the offseason.
Yeah, I joked to the start of the show. If you like reality TV drama, well, come to the Winnipeg Jets season. Coach walks out, you replace him with one of the players' dads, which you've never really seen before. You're one of your top line center, hints at wanting a trade. You got the wily veteran, Paul Stastny, calling him out in a press conference. So, that's just the drama. We did have some highlights of the season as well. We've talked about over the last week, Eric Comrie's emergence, Kyle Connor's breakout all-star season, where I don't want to hear him being underrated anymore. I never want to hear it. He was like top among the leaders in goals, at a record season as far as for Jets 2.0 in terms of goals and points. But as far as team success, fallen short. It was incredibly disappointing from what we thought. And I think when Connor Hellebuyck called them a dynasty going forward, in the preseason, I don't think this was what he had in mind. So it's going to be fascinating. I'm here for it, and we have had close to record numbers here in the show. It's among there with one of our top shows ever. So interest among the team remains very high.
By the way, and I know we're not going to spend much time on these games other than to congratulate Dennis Bayak for a great career and finishing up on the weekend. AFC, though, did get 47 yesterday, a game winner to finish up. He's got to be a shoo-in for the Lady Byng Trophy, right?
And you heard
four penalty minutes all season long. I'd like to go back. I'm trying to think of what were his 2 penalties all season long.
We should go. Should I go track him down?
This is that Bruder film. We can break down the tape of Kyle Connor's 2 penalties. But listen, there were a number of players that did have great seasons. He was at the top of the list right now. But it's a team game, and unfortunately, the team didn't get the results. You knew there was more to it than maybe what we were seeing in front of our eyes each and every night. And we heard a lot about it, and it's just going to set up for that much more of a very, very interesting offseason. Hey, we'll continue this. Hammer's going to join us tomorrow. I imagine this topic is going to dominate the program this week. Although I will mention we've got Moose playoffs. We've got Ice playoffs. The Ice, congratulations, moving on to the second round. Tough end in triple OT last night for the Brandon Wheat Kings. They're out. Was really hoping for a battle of Manitoba. Carson Lambos, though, will get us ready for round 2. He's going to join us tomorrow on the program, and we'll certainly tee up the Moose a little later on this week. But Remo, we do have Stanley Cup playoff action beginning tonight. Might be a great night to kick back with a few ready-to-drink Canadian Club and ginger ales from our friends over at CC. The CC and Ginger will be the drink of the summer. It's available at your local beer stores as well as Manitoba liquor marts. And check out the CC display at 26 liquor marts this year, this week and this month. Hit a free can of the CC and Ginger with any Canadian club purchase to try it, or you can just pick up a 6-pack or singles at your local beer store. Congratulations to our big winners in the marble race on Friday. We'll do another one and have some great prizing courtesy of our friends at Canadian Club on Friday afternoon. Now listen, before we finish up the program, we do have to get to the fact that 16 teams are beginning the quest for the Stanley Cup tonight. Let's take a quick look at the cool bet lines this evening. We've got Boston and the Hurricanes at 6 p.m. Carolina -119 favorite. Bruins even money or +101. 6:30, it's the Lightning and the Maple Leafs. Leafs -130 at home. Lightning +112. Cannot wait for this Blues Wild series to get going tonight. They're at the XL Energy Center in the Twin Cities. Minnesota -139. Blues +119. And the finale this evening is the Kings and the Edmonton Oilers. Rick's all going to be rocking, or I guess it's now the Rogers Arena. -192 for the Oilers, +162 for the Kings. Before we finish up here, any thoughts on the playoffs? I will let people know Dustin Nielsen and I cranked out a quick playoff lock shop edition with our picks in the East and the West. A few games tonight. Some of the picks we liked over under a number of games. But Remo, what are your thoughts right now heading in? Have you made a fat wager on your Stanley Cup champion? Any series bets? What's going on?
I haven't really done anything. I was doing some playoff best ball drafts yesterday on Underdog. I don't know if anyone does that. I did do a bracket challenge. I'll tell you who I'm on. Here's my bracket. I'm unveiling it. I filled it out last night very quickly. All right, come judge me. Here we go. I have Calgary over Carolina in the Cup final. I'm picking Colorado over Nashville, Minnesota over St. Louis. LA is my upset pick in round one.
Oh, wow.
I think Edmonton, I know they're playing really well lately. I think Phil Deno, he's elite player defensively. He's going to shut them down. We saw what the Jets did to Edmonton last year in the playoffs. I'm going, sorry, Leafs fans, going Tampa. I think I had them in 7. Florida over Washington, Carolina over Boston. I got in Carolina over the Rangers. So I don't know if this is a chalk bracket. I think it's hard to go against.
Who did you have winning,
Colorado.
Calgary or Carolina?
I think I have Calgary. I have Calgary as the Cup champions.
You know what? I'm on Calgary
so
as well. And I'll tell you what, if you think back to our shows, and I did a lock shop, jumped on with Meanie. We talked about it at the All-Star break. Carolina 12-1, Calgary 23-1. And that looks pretty good to me. Although I'm actually riding with Tampa in the East. I think that Andrei Vasilevsky is the key for them. I mean, I think they're very close. I mean, Toronto's going to give them a run. But when you look at Vasilevsky, what he's done in the past, the experience in that room, John Cooper having won 2 cups before, I just think that they were going to be a really, really tough out. And I'm not sure whether Sergei Bobrovsky can give the sort of goaltending to Florida that they're going to need to get out. So I do like Tampa on the one side, and I'm with you on Calgary. Been on them for the better part of the second half of this season. As we mentioned, 23-1 at the All-Star break. Jacob Markstrom big. And I did make a couple wagers on Conn Smythe. If you like Calgary, Markstrom at 30-1 and Elias Lindholm at 30-1. I think real good value if you do like Calgary to win. Calgary right now 8-1 to win the Stanley Cup. All the odds for tonight's game are there, and you still have until 6 p.m. to start getting on the year series prices for a few of them, as well as the NHL season bets right now. But we can tell you the Avalanche are the favorite at 3 plus 350 to win the Cup. Panthers plus 550. The Toronto Maple Leafs plus 725. Calgary 8-1. Lightning 11-1. Flames 12-1. Oilers 18. And the Rangers, Bruins, and Wild all at 200. The longest shot is the Nashville Predators and LA Kings at 60-1. Dallas at 55. Caps 37. And then 25 for the Blues and Penguins. Packed show today. Thanks to everyone that's been with us. By the way, if you're playing a cool bet, use the promo code WST. If you haven't played there before, give you a 100% bonus up to $200 on your initial deposit. And as eventful as the last 24 hours, Reem, have been in this show today, you have to think that this is just getting started. We knew this would be the most significant offseason since the Jets came back in 2.0 history. It got started off with a bang, and I imagine these conversations about where the team goes from here, and specifically about Mark Scheifele's future and potential trade returns for their longtime number one center, will continue to be top of mind and top of the docket on this program as we get into this offseason.
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of comments. Get in a Scheifele trade, speculation. Who can we expect to get in who's your list for coaching? We gotta do a slow burn here. We got a lot of time to get to all this stuff. The playoffs just started. It's May, free agency in July. We don't need to blow our whole wad early on. Let's get to recapping what was said, and then we can start getting deeper into all that.
Trust me, folks. Tomorrow's program, Hamilton will be on. We'll get his reaction to what's happened, and we'll start talking about those things. Murat will be on with us this week. We'll talk to Rowicki. We'll talk to Kenny Weeb. We'll maybe see if Rennie and Billick want to jump on as well. So there will be no shortage of topics. A topic, but no shortage of discussion on that. And we will dig into some potential, landing spots for Mark Scheifele. And most importantly, regardless of where he goes, what would make sense for the Winnipeg Jets to bring back, and what's realistic on a player with the numbers that Mark Scheifele has in the situation that he is in, with 2 years left on a very affordable contract considering his production so far. So, lots for us. And again, CFL draft tomorrow is going to be happening. We got the Ice and Moose playoffs. So if you haven't been a regular up until this point, become a regular, whether you're listening on the podcast or join us every day at 1 o'clock. Shout out to everyone that's with us, and make sure you hit that thumbs up button. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. It's free. It's easy. Hit that red subscribe button and join us tomorrow as we get right back into it at 1 o'clock here on Winnipeg Sports Talk.
Yeah, if Scheifele's on the roster come training camp, you think he sits down day one and says, "Well, I'm here, aren't I?" Shout out to Eric in the chat who mentioned that one. Then he follows it up with, "Hey, even Gretzky got traded, right?" Isn't that what he would say first day? That's a reference to.
I'll tell you what, if it does end up that this is Mark Scheifele's final game in that game against Ottawa where he got injured, and this was Mark Scheifele's final media address as a member of the Winnipeg Jets, it'll be incredibly interesting to compare the end of Patrik Laine and Mark Scheifele here in Winnipeg, especially considering what was afforded the both of them, their spot on the team, how they were treated. Patrik Laine did exactly that. I'm here, aren't I? Went out, and Patrik Laine is my last remembrance of the Winnipeg Jets. Patrik Laine as a Jet was being the best player on the ice in the opening game of the season against Calgary and scoring the overtime winner. And there's a good possibility that our final memories of Mark Scheifele would be this incredibly disappointing season, wondering, where the given F factor was for the majority of the season. And then what we'll probably remember here in Winnipeg for a long time is somewhat of a notorious press conference where it was all about him and not about the team. That being said, I'm here for it. It gives us lots to talk about here on Winnipeg Sports Talk as we get into a very, very interesting off season.
We do have, I will chime in. I mean, we do have people are like, what are you going to talk about here? Now that the Jets are done. But we do have the Ice and the Moose. Lambos coming on tomorrow. Daniel Fink texted me last week about having some Moose content as well this week, so we'll be touching on that. Their playoffs starting Friday, and we even mentioned Stamberg and Barron sent down today. They will be participating. And yeah, CFL draft, Bomber training camp, a lot of stuff around the corner. So great to see so many people interested in chat today. This has been one of the most fun shows that we've had.
Yeah, that being said, and you were all right, and we've mentioned that there will be a number of other things to talk about. I'm not sure there'll be a day that goes by where we don't talk about the latest on the Winnipeg Jets in this offseason with so many of our regulars, and of course to all of you. Thanks to everyone that came out today. Great performance in the chat. Awesome stuff. Folks, if you're with us live on YouTube, head on over to KNR. Tell them hi from the boys at WST. They're doing a little bit of a season wrap-up as well. And I know the Illegal Curve guys are doing it tonight as well, a little bit later on. I believe 8 o'clock, if I'm not mistaken. Check their channel. Dennis Bayak's going to jump on with them, so you're not going to want to miss that. We'll look forward to having Dennis on at some point in the very near future as well. Huge thanks to all of our sponsors. Great to have Assiniboia Downs back on board, Aikens Lake Wilderness Lodge, Wallace & Wallace, F Apparel, Vita Health Fresh Market, Culligan, Manitoba Battery, Royal Sports, Breezy Bend, Not Auto Corp, Little Brown Jug, Princess Auto, Boston Pizza, the Nick and Nicky DQ Group, Canadian Club Whiskey, and of course our betting partners at Coolbet Canada. Gonna go get some wagers in. Oh, and pay my taxes before the end of the day, and then get ready for some playoff hockey tonight. Great to be back here in Winnipeg after an awesome week in Vegas. Once again, thanks to our friends at the D Hotel and Circa for the incredible hospitality. Working on something special for a Vegas trip next year with Winnipeg Sports Talk listeners. We'll tell you more about that in the months to come. But get on back here, 1 p.m. tomorrow. More on the aftermath of the Winnipeg Jets season and everything that's transpired in the last 24 hours. Thanks for being with us. We'll see you tomorrow here on Winnipeg Sports Talk.
Oh, my God! Oh! Shut it down! Let's go home!
Thanks for tuning in to Winnipeg Sports Talk Daily. Make sure to subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast feed at winnipegsportstalk.com.